Welcome, everyone. Thank you very, very much for joining us this evening. I'm Dr. Dialo Brown, your moderator for the first session that we're having this afternoon. And this is CCFP, the final webinar, the final seminar conference for the year 2021. So we're just so happy that colleagues and everyone else that you've decided to spend your afternoon with us, you've made a great choice. Today's conference focuses on the health of men and women. It's a big topic. And to begin the day, I will ask Dr. Dane Levy to share a prayer with us. And this will immediately be followed by Dr. Kayan Bukal, who will welcome us all to this event. Dr. Levy, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I apologize for Dr. Levy not being here. He had an engagement that he unfortunately could not get out of. So I was asked to do the prayer today. I'm Dr. Arlene Henry Dawkins, and may we invite the presence of the Lord for this prayer. So good afternoon, everyone. May we place ourselves in reverence to welcome the presence of Almighty God, our Father, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Spirit. Almighty God and all-loving God, we praise and thank you for this day, for your faithfulness and your love. We come to you now humbly asking for your wonderful blessings and help as we are gathered virtually for today's conference. We pray for your guidance in the scheduled presentations. We ask that you would clearly show the way to conduct the proceedings with a spirit of joy and enthusiasm as various speakers impart their knowledge and expertise in the very important topic of men and women health. May the invaluable information be received with clarity and increase our desire to find ways to use this knowledge to ensure the best management of the persons in our care as health practitioners. We ask your infinite blessings on the sponsors of this conference, the moderators, the audiovisual personnel, and all the administrators, so that a seamless flow of the proceedings will be achieved for a successful conference. We ask this in the awesome name of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. Amen.
Thank you, Dr. Dawkins, Dr. Henry Dawkins. We're now asking Dr. Bukal, please go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Morgan. Good afternoon, everybody. So on behalf of the executive of the Caribbean College of Family Physicians, we'd like to welcome you. We'd like to welcome you to this conference where we are talking about men and women's health. And we also have an ethics component where we'll be speaking about the ethical considerations of cannabis use and prescription of cannabis in a medical setting. We have exciting presentations in store and would like to welcome you and welcome our esteemed and very knowledgeable presenters, Dr. Joy Callender, Dr. Dialo Brown, Dr. Alicia Hayman, Dr. Jordan Eaton, Dr. Winston, and of course, we can't forget our sponsors. We welcome H2000 Canada, Indus Pharma, and Abbott Nutritionals. We are in for a treat today that will stimulate our minds, and we hope you find benefit in it. I now hand over back to Madam Chair, Dr. Anna Brown-Morgan.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Bukal. And we are all smiles today because we have with us as our first presenter, someone who is well known to us here at CCFP. Dr. Joy Callender is a trusted advisor to our patients. and has presented several times and on several occasions over many years to us. I'd like to share with you, for those who do not yet know though, that she is a nutritionist, a top of the line nutritionist, Dr. Callender. She received her PhD in nutrition from the TMRU unit at the University of the West Indies, and has done postdoctoral work, training in diabetes education in Florida, nutrition policies and programs in Chile, and clinical nutrition for the oncology patient in Florida. And of course, we all know that she is a weight management coach. She also has her own business. She owns and manages the Nutrition Center in Kingston, which provides nutrition consultations and offers a range of services, including seminars and webinars virtually, if so needed. She's a registered nutritionist, a member of the Jamaica Association of Professionals in Nutrition and Dietetics, that is JAPINAD, and she is the first vice president of the Caribbean Obesity Society. So she's a serious lady when it comes to weight management. She's author of several peer-reviewed journals and an advocate for Jamaicans adopting healthy lifestyles. So, Dr. Callender, Dr. Joy Callender, welcome. Your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I will now share my screen. Let me just say thank you to CCFP. We have a long history together. And thank you for inviting me to share with you once again. So we're doing some man and woman business today, but of course, all in the interest of nutrition and forgive me, having a bit of a bother with my throat. As it relates to nutrition and weight management. Next slide, please. So we can go quickly here. You get the picture, a lot of fast foods. We can go to the next slide. Particularly during the pandemic, I think many of us can identify with that. And there has been quite a bit of unhealthy habits which have even more sedentary than we may have been in the past. And of course, eating. A lot of work being done online, sitting in front of a computer using mobile unit screens more often. And so that can, of course, result in weight gain and lack of exercise, and more sedentary habits. Next slide, please. And we can go right on. We can go to assessing our nutritional status. This is an equation, a formula that most of us should know by now. We've certainly seen it. So it's your weight in pounds, that's 703 that you multiply by. It's just a factor because it really is a metric formula. So that takes care of the units, and then we divide by height squared. And that BMI approximates pretty much to % body fat. Next slide, please. So once you've calculated the BMI, that number actually has a meaning. And on the right-hand side, we can see how we interpret that number that we call BMI. If you're less than 18.5, you're underweight. I haven't paid too much attention to being underweight. My experience at this point in time is that most of our concerns have to do with being overweight and obese. So where we really want to be somewhere between 19 and just under 25. Once we get to 25, we're overweight or obese. Between 25 and 29.9, we're at, I'm sorry, overweight over 25, right? So just below 20. Once we get to 30, we're obese grade 1, and 35 grade 2, and above 40 grade 3. Next slide, please. A chart that we can always use. I like to use it because it's interactive. You can do it just where you are. So if you, let's say you're 5 feet, height is in feet and inches on the y-axis, weight is in pounds on the x-axis, and you can, wherever you are, most people have a pretty good idea what their height is and what their weight is and where they coincide. So if you're 5'8", and let us say you're 125, then you would be in this healthy, I'm sorry, healthy weight category. Once you're in this region, you're in the overweight category. And once you get into this darker area, then you're in the obese category. I'm not asking for any volunteers today, so everybody can relax. Next slide, please. No, obesity, sorry, is associated with more than 26 nutrition-related diseases. Hence, our interest in being able to assess your nutritional status. Because once you're aware of what your BMI is, and you are aware of whether you're overweight or obese, then it's time to seek help or to just do something about that. Try to lose that weight. Diabetes, hypertension, well, type 2 diabetes anyway. Many of us have the association. More and more I'm seeing people with PCOS and the importance of losing weight in order as part of the management for some of these diseases. Next slide, please. If you choose to engage in a weight management program, these are some of the things that you want to look for, or it should include. You want a realistic plan, something you can do. You need to set clear goals, monitoring, accountability. That's where somebody like me comes in as a nutritionist or a dietitian, or you do have exercise coaches who you need to be accountable for somebody. If you can do it on your own, that's absolutely fine. But if not, there is help. And as part of the program, you need to understand particular tools, things like reading nutrition labels and so on, so that you can become a master. You start off being given certain suggestions, but as you understand and increase your knowledge, you're empowered and you can make more decisions on your own. Changing behavior is a very important part of weight management because anybody can do any diet they pick up online or in a book or magazine. The challenge is to come up with a program that you can actually do. In the initial stage, that is where you might want to be losing weight, but ultimately you want to come to a point where you want to maintain that weight loss that you have achieved. And that's where the behavior change becomes important. Next slide, please. Are there gender differences? It seems that there are. Genetically, men tend to have more muscle or lean body mass than women. If you just think of women, just the fact that there's breast tissue, which often includes quite a significant amount of fat, and that varies. So these are some of the things that make a difference. For instance, that's one of the reasons why men don't float as well as women, because muscle is heavier. So it's more difficult for them to do that. On the upside, muscle actually burns more calories. It's more metabolically efficient. And so this is often one of the reasons why men can often seem to lose weight more readily than women. The subcutaneous fat, which is just under the skin, you may not like it. It's nobody wants fat really, although it does add some curves, I suppose. But it is the visceral fat, which is around the inner organs, underneath muscle, which secretes inflammatory processes and increases your risk for type 2 diabetes, fatty liver, and cardiovascular diseases. Next slide, please. Other gender differences, psychosocial factors. Women are more in tune with the concept of seeking health and changing their behaviors. Men, it is thought, well, my throat is really giving me a hard time. Men tend to be more motivated by health issues. So if they come down with something like diabetes and their vision is impaired or they have erectile dysfunction, some of those sequelae of diabetes, then that tends to take them off to the doctor to seek help. And it's very often the women in their lives which propel them to do even that. Women, on the other hand, are often more subject to emotional eating, responding to stress, and a common way we tend to turn to the things that we really enjoy, the cakes, the things that are high in fat and sugars, and so on. And then for women, the hormone changes. There are hormone changes with both men and women, but particularly with women as they approach menopause and the estrogen level drops, you have more loss of muscle mass. And these are some of the things that can make losing weight more difficult. Next slide, please. I thought I'd give you some tips for weight loss. Protein, very important. It's more difficult to digest, burns more calories, and so is helpful. It helps you to feel full. It's important that you eat regularly. Try to keep your blood sugar as steady as possible. Try to minimize hunger. When people are hungry, they make very poor choices in terms of what they eat, grabbing whatever is available. And unless you have a planned program, usually the choices are not great. Make healthy food choices, fresh, wholesome foods as best as you can. I've tried to avoid unprocessed foods as much as possible. The method of cooking is very important. Jamaica is, I think, the fried chicken, perhaps capital of, I don't know if it's the world, but it's one of our favorite methods of cooking. And the Jamaica Healthy Lifestyle Survey bears this out. When you look at the types of methods of cooking that we use, whether it's deep frying or it's brown stewing, which often means frying first and cooking down. So these are some of the things that we have to be careful with. Thank you. If I were at a podium, I know somebody would have brought me some water. Manage portion size, that's critical. And it's one of the things that I spend a lot of time doing, because very often our concept of eating is deranged. We don't recognize how much food we actually eat. And of course, we should monitor snacks, beverages, and fast foods. Next slide, please. So we need to manage stress levels. And again, that plays into the whole business of a different set of hormones. Avoid sugary drinks. Fiber is extremely important. And although I'm talking about weight management, more and more we're beginning to understand the importance of fiber, not just for regularity and management of cholesterol, but as it relates to a healthy microbiome, the bacteria which we have in the gut, and how important this is for not just health, but actually weight management. Try to base your diet on whole foods. And I use the word diet deliberately. Maybe I should define it. Your diet is simply what you eat. I'm not talking about the kind of fad diets which we often engage in. One of the things I have come more and more to accept is that late night eating is important. When I started in this business, I thought perhaps it didn't matter as long as we considered your total calorie intake for the day. But when I look at things like the success of, for instance, intermittent dieting, I believe it is absolutely important that we try to not eat late at night. And of course, we must include some healthy fats, which give us some of the essential fats that we need. And not only for taste, but it's important for satiety, so that when you eat, you feel as though you have eaten. We've done the low fat and fat-free stuff, and we know that long term it doesn't actually work. Next slide, please. We can keep going. So this is the picture which is associated with the food-based dietary guidelines launched by Jamaica's Ministry of Health in 2015. And so it includes all of the food groups. Notice the importance of water. There's activity, whether it's climbing stairs or more structured kind of exercise. But whenever we talk about nutrition, it goes hand in hand with the burning of calories, and that's where exercise comes in. Next slide, please. So these are actually the guidelines which were developed by the Ministry of Health. And what we want to do is to eat a variety of foods from all of the food groups. Always be wary of any weight loss program which seeks to exclude wholesale any particular food group. We want to eat some fruit, lots of vegetables, particularly foods which have a high volume of water. This is why things like vegetables, cucumber, and or fruits, things like watermelon, the citrus fruits, a lot of water. So you feel full, but for relatively few calories, including peas and beans. And I've been pushing peas and beans, particularly during the pandemic, because they're a source of both protein and carbohydrate, and they are relatively cheap compared to a lot of the meats and fish and so on, which of course are excellent, but I'm talking costs now. Reducing our intake of processed foods, watch your intake of fats and oils, reducing the sugar drinks. That has been a big part of what the Ministry of Health has been pushing for a while now. Next slide, please. So these are the food groups. That's what you saw in that pie chart. Next slide, please. Just a quick, these are the macronutrients, fats, carbohydrates, proteins. There are no more. So whatever diet plan you choose has to include these macronutrients. And please notice that there is a range for each of the macronutrients and what works for different people. For instance, when you look at fats, we have a significant range, 15 to 40%. So something like the Mediterranean diet would be at the higher end. Vegans would be at the lower end of that 15%. So there's a variety. And what we want to do is simply work with individuals from where they are to come up with a plan that works for them. Next slide, please. What is a healthy Jamaican diet? It should include the regular consumption of lean protein, healthy and essential fats, vegetables, and complex high fiber carbohydrates. Next slide, please. Now, this is a source of healthy lean protein, and there's everything there to suit each and every individual. So if you don't eat pork, then you don't eat pork. But if you eat pork, you're going to have that pork trimmed. That's why we call pork the other white meat. And we go to the other extent the other end of the spectrum. So that's our peas and beans or nuts and seeds. Can't leave out the nuts and seeds because they're also a good source of healthy fat and protein. And of course, as much seafood as you can do, fish, very important. Next slide, please. So this is not what we're trying to do, and this is not what I'm trying to do, and it doesn't work, trying not to eat. Next slide, please. These pictures, I thought I would include them just to show that we can eat our Jamaican foods. It doesn't have to be exotic fare that we can neither afford, nor have we developed the taste over the years. So we can have our jerk chicken, we can have our rice and peas, but let's get some vegetables in there. Next slide, please. So that's a relatively small meal. This is a much bigger meal. But notice, so your sweet potato is there, but notice that almost half of that plate is actually vegetables, and we must have some protein. Next slide, please. Next slide. We can go very quickly here because this is just somebody who has lost 100 pounds. And it's there just to say that, yes, you can. Next slide, please. Alcohol, very important. Who doesn't enjoy some amount of alcohol? I'm not talking about latent alcoholics now, so it's something that I try very hard not to promote. Nonetheless, the increase in alcohol consumption has increased during the pandemic. It's a way of when people are finished at the end of a day to relax. And again, I go back to the Mediterranean diet. So alcohol can in fact be included in a healthy diet. Next slide, please. Look at some of those calories. One beer, 220 calories. Any distilled liquor, 1.5 ounces of, let's say, rum, 90 calories. But by the time you have a rum and coke, you've got to 200 calories. And then again, we hit the ladies. We love the cocktails, they're sweet, but the alcohol is there. And you can see things like margaritas and daiquiris and pina coladas. You can see how high the calorie content can be. Next slide, please. Physical activity to prevent the nutrition-related chronic diseases, a minimum of a half an hour most days of the week. That's the recommendation. If we're talking weight loss, however, next slide, then we want to step that up. So we can increase exercise in any number of ways. We can do more days, we can do an increasing length of time, and plain old walking works, you know. However, circuit training is found to be particularly useful. But anyway, we're going to be talking about exercise later, so I'm not going to go too much into this. I must say, though, that as far as our, particularly women, as we get older and we begin to lose some of our lean body mass, resistance exercise becomes increasingly important. Things like Pilates and stationary bikes, things you can change the tension and so on. In summary, therefore, determine your nutritional status goals, pay attention to portion control, try to eat 3 meals. The snacks, often useful. I think 3 snacks may be too much if you're trying to lose weight, but this is where you this is where you may need to pay attention to calorie counts now, because snacks can be very high calorie. Achieve and maintain a healthy weight, stay hydrated, make small behavior changes, and be physically active. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Oh, okay. So we have another summary. It should say pretty much the same thing. We can go on to the next slide. In conclusion, therefore, usually when it comes to weight management, as it relates to weight loss, usually we need to eat less and move more. Next slide. Thank you very much.
We thank you so very much to Dr. Joy Callender for this presentation today, this morning. You've left us with some wonderful little tidbits. We must eat in moderation. We must enjoy our lives still.
Yes.
We can exercise in moderation, but we can exercise a bit more. And especially, you say, with resistance training, circuit training, if as we get older, we can eat snacks, but it's all about what we snack on. And also, it was extremely interesting to see the stark differences between men and women's bodies in terms of the metabolism and our psychosocial differences, what men respond to health things, whereas we women, we need to be more, we're more emotional and tend to binge and eat when we're upset. So thank you for making it real for us, why we lose weight, or how to lose weight, and why we gain weight, and what to do about it. And we just want to thank you very much for being a part of our presentation today.
You're very welcome.
And Merry Christmas to you.
Yes, a very Merry Christmas. Stay safe and don't overdo it.
Thank you. And we're going to move on now. I wanted to say, Dr. Henry Dawkins, I didn't even say thank you for your prayer up front. I guess I was a little, I just came straight before the call. But thank you also for your prayers. And I'd like now to move on to our second speaker, who is Dr. Dialo Brown. And he comes to us with quite a packet of experience, and he's been everywhere and done everything. Dr. Rudolph Brown. He's a registered physical therapist for over 15 years. And I just quickly mentioned Bachelor of Science, Physical Therapy, first class honors from Louis Mona School of Physical Therapy, Master of Science, Sports Medicine, from what is now, Armstrong campus of Georgia State University, and Doctor of Physical Therapy from Nova Southeastern University in Florida. He's a certified strength and conditioning specialist under the National Strength and Conditioning Association. And he's the first local physiotherapist with that type of certification. So he is top of the tops. Currently, he has a private practice in which he's trying to develop in it sports medicine, sports and exercise medicine, and a general practice otherwise in physical therapy. He is a strength coach with youth athletes, swimmers in the main, and adults as well. He's an executive member of the Jamaica Association of Sports Medicine, deputy chair of the medical committee of the National Powerlifting Association of Jamaica. I should ask you to stand up so we can say that powerlifting physique is there, doctor.
I didn't say I powerlift.
And he's a member of the Jamaica Physical Therapy Association. He has in the past lectured both at University of the West Indies School of Physical Therapy and UTEC Caribbean School of Sports Sciences. He says, and I just end with this, that one of his biggest regrets is dropping out of and shying away from sports as a youngster. However, he became fascinated with exercise and the science behind having a fit body. So he is here with us now. His philosophy, all of us are athletes. All of us are athletes, one way or the other in the game of life. So thank you, Dr. Dialo Rudolph Brown. Come on board for us, please. It's your time.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Brown Morgan, for that introduction. And thank you to everyone. Let me just get straight to share my screen here. All right. right, just let me know if you're seeing my screen and if you're seeing the slideshow.
Sorry,
We're
Doc.
seeing it.
Could I just interject? I did not say that Doc will be presenting on the prescription for good bone and muscle health and achieving lower BMI in adulthood, which is major. If you can do that for us today, Doc Brown, you'd have really made most of us days, right? So thank you. Back to you.
Right, sure, I will do what I can. All right, so again, thank you to the Caribbean College of Family Physicians, especially the Jamaica chapter. Wishing you well in the rest of your webinar, and thank you for having me present to you. So yes, as we said, the topic today of my presentation is the exercise prescription for good bone health. So let's minimize this here. For good bone and muscle health and lower BMI in adults. So I can skip the slide quickly, since my information was given out already. Can you just confirm if you're seeing my screen clearly and hearing me clearly?
Seeing opening questions.
Yes, okay, no problem. All right, there we go.
Okay.
Yeah, so I just want to put a few opening questions to the audience, just for you to think about. What does the term exercise prescription mean to you when you hear that? What do you think of? Do you think exercise prescription is something that's necessary? Do you give exercise prescriptions, or do you maybe refer patients for exercise prescriptions? And also, do you think that giving exercise prescriptions or referring patients for exercise prescriptions will be helpful to your family practice, perhaps helpful to your patients as well? So as I'm continuing, let me just make a little note. I'm not sure if you saw it, but I actually changed the topic slightly in terms of the wording. Originally, what I was given was exercise, the prescription for good bone health, good muscle health, etc. But I've slightly worded it to say the exercise prescription for good bone health, etc. And the reason for that is that Dr. Joy Callender would, of course, just spoken to us about nutrition. And Dr. Callender, I thank you very much for your presentation. In a way, you've kind of initiated things for me, so I'm taking the baton from you. So I do thank you for your presentation. But yes, Dr. Callender would have outlined that nutrition is a vital part, especially of the prescription for lowering BMI or for controlling BMI. And of course, nutrition would also be important for good bone and muscle health. Having said that, my presentation will focus on the exercise aspect of the overall prescription for bone health, muscle health, and lower BMI. All right, so just quickly as an outline, I won't go into everything here. I'm going to try to speed through this presentation because I think I have a lot more than fitting the time. But I'm going to go through a few definitions, define, of course, exercise prescription and give a few examples of exercise prescription. I'm going to speak about a few factors that are actually affecting these different aspects of health, which is bone health, muscle health, etc. And of course, Dr. Callender, you may reference to this resistance training. That will be the focus of my presentation today, how resistance training can fit in to this exercise and prescription. All right, so going through somewhat quickly, good bone health. Bone health is measured, or is a measure of what's called the bone mineral density, and tends to be measured using X-ray technology, which is of course a DEXA scan, dual X-ray absorptiometry. I hope I'm saying that properly. That's what's used to measure bone mineral density. The units are given as what's called a T-score, which is really a statistical measure. And we'll go into those kind of details, but I'll just basically say that it's basically relative to what's considered the standard deviation relative to an average 30-year-old adult. So population norms, a normal bone mineral density would have a T-score, which is above minus 1.0 standard deviations. Again, that's relative to an average 30-year-old adult. So at someone of a moderate risk, in terms of moderate risk of, say, fractures, or of course having weak bones, are women and men, I'm going to highlight men as well, with low bone mass, having a T-score that's going to be between minus 1.0 to minus 2.5 standard deviations. Plus, of course, your other risk factors for fractures and falls. And therefore, high-risk persons are persons who might have a confirmed diagnosis of osteoporosis, which is really thinning of the bones, a T-score of less than minus 2.5 standard deviations. So what does this mean in practical terms? Well, poor scores in bone health, so looking at between moderate risk and high risk, those can have implications for a risk of what I call pathological fractures, where a patient might suffer a fracture even without in trauma without a natural fall and so on. They might just make a sudden move, they might trip over something, and next thing you know, it's a fracture because of weak bones. Or if they do suffer some kind of trauma, let's say a natural fall, the fracture that they might suffer might actually be more severe than it would have been otherwise. So those are important aspects where bone health is concerned. Now, speaking of muscle health, there are a few components of muscle health which I'm going to go into. There's, of course, muscle mass, the actual size of muscles, and there is some importance to that because a certain amount of muscle mass, let's call it a functional level of muscle mass, is going to be protective for your joints. It's going to help prevent joint injuries. Of course, muscle mass is a correlation between muscle mass and muscle strength, which I'll speak of next. Muscle strength is actually the force produced by muscles. So how much force is produced when you do a particular movement. Now, I'm going to make a distinction here between muscle strength and muscle power. I know as clinicians, we tend to say, okay, muscle power, muscle strength are the same. When you might do your little manual muscle test, you might say, okay, the patient has grade 5 out of 5 muscle power. That's technically incorrect because your muscle power is technically the rate of muscle force production, meaning how quickly muscle force is produced. There's a distinction between strength and power, which I'll go into a bit later on. Then, of course, it's muscular endurance, which is the ability to repeat a particular muscle action. So let's say lifting a particular weight, or usually a lighter weight repeatedly, or the ability to maybe sustain a particular muscle action. So for example, now just holding up upright posture, your trunk muscles now have to have a certain level of muscular endurance. And of course, there's going to be flexibility, or what I like to call muscle extensibility, meaning the ability of a muscle to produce its force through its full range of motion and also to undergo a certain level of lengthening and going back to its original length. So those are aspects of good muscle health. So again, that distinction between strength and power. Strength, as demonstrated on the left here, is the amount of force that can be produced. So regardless of the time, regardless of how long it takes to actually produce that strength. So you're lifting a weight, whether it's a light weight or heavy weight, that is your strength. Power, on the other hand, now is producing that force quickly, and that has certain implications for functional activities. So for example, now your muscle strength might be the ability to say, stand up from a seated position. It could be maybe to stand up from a low toilet seat or stand up from a low bench or something like that, especially independently. Also, see this here, right? Also, the ability of your lower extremity muscles to produce force to be able to walk. So that is your strength in terms of practical examples. Power, on the other hand, yes, power now is the ability to stand up from a seated position quickly. That's a slight distinction. Or even let's say when walking, whereas muscle strength might be the ability to produce force to walk, power now is being able to maybe walk quickly when necessary, maybe to negotiate an obstacle, or maybe even to prevent a fall. Let's say you trip, you put your leg out quickly to prevent a fall. So again, definite functional implications for both. So again, these components of muscle health, they have implications for function, for carrying out activities of daily living, and for general independence. And of course, our health-related quality of life.
All right, Doc. Sorry to interrupt here. About 52% of persons who have answered the poll are saying that the volume is a bit low. I am hearing it clearly. Okay. Some persons, 47% hearing it clearly. Maybe a projection issue, maybe a position of your microphone. I'm not sure if you're using the laptop microphone or you actually have one that you could put closer to you.
Well, I think it's the microphone in my headset. I think.
There you go, and I'm hearing you very clearly. So we'll just continue. Apologies if you see the pop-up. I'll just do a couple more during your presentation just to ensure that persons are hearing. Okay, it's very good and very clear so far. Thanks.
Okay, that's okay. Thank you. And yeah, just keep it posted. All right. Okay, and then body mass index. Now, I won't even need to go into that definition there because Dr. Callender has done a very effective job where that's concerned. What I will do is mention body composition. There can be some relationship, or there is some relationship between body mass index and the body composition, where the body composition is the amount of fat mass versus lean body mass that's in your body. So of course you want to have lower fat mass in general. Now, of course, your BMI and body composition, there are implications for cardiovascular disease risk and also the risk of other NCDs, non-communicable diseases. Right? So then, having defined those aspects of health, let me define the exercise prescription. One might define the exercise prescription as basically the exercise program that's given to address specific needs identified through specific assessments, especially in the clinical context. Exercise here now, I want to make a distinction between exercise and physical activity, where exercise is meaningful or intentional physical activity performed to improve one or more aspects of physical fitness. So exercise is a type of physical activity, but the main thing is that it's meant to try to improve some measure of physical fitness. So whether it is strength, whether it is endurance, etc. So, and I'm making the clinical connection here in terms of exercise prescription, because in this case, exercise is being used to help treat, to help cure, in a sense, or to actually help prevent diseases or actual disease states and illnesses. So, why exercise prescription? Why would exercise need to be prescribed? Well, the World Health Organization has they have certain physical activity guidelines, which I'll reference later on. But basically, in our modern modern day society, in general, there's a greater prevalence of sedentary behavior, which is in stark contrast to the World Health Organization guidelines of physical activity. With this increased sedentary behavior, there's of course going to be an increase in their NCDs. And this is especially linked with our sedentary behavior, and especially our poor levels of physical fitness. So what has been found is that exercise in its various forms, resistance training, aerobic exercise, etc., has been clinically proven to actually help benefit these conditions and actually to help prevent these conditions in the first place. And of course, prescribing exercise is also an effective adjunct in terms of actually managing disease states. So having said that, when we speak of muscle health, bone health, and BMI, these are different aspects of health. Now, there are multiple factors that can actually affect these aspects of health, things such as age, hormonal status, which can be linked to age, but can also be independent on our health status, especially our level of physical fitness and nutritional habits and status. Sorry, I think my connection is breaking up somewhat. Sorry about that.
Connection is fine. You're coming through clear.
Okay.
Yeah, man.
Okay. All right, thank you.
No, man, it's great presentation. Everybody's enjoying it.
Okay, good. All right, no problem. All right. So these factors are factors that can affect these different aspects of health. However, what we can have the most influence on is, of course, nutritional status and habits, which, of course, Dr. Callender would have spoken on, so I won't even touch that really. And, of course, our level of physical fitness and our habits of physical fitness. So in that regard, now, let me speak about actually prescribing exercise. So when it comes down to time to, let us say, prescribe an exercise program, there are a few steps that one will want to take. You're going to do first what's called a needs analysis, which is just basically look at the patient overall. You'll do a series of screens and assessments, which of course be actually part of the needs analysis. And then of course you go about designing the actual exercise program. So just to summarize quickly here, the needs analysis is basically looking at what the patient or the client needs. You might factor in things like the reason the patient was actually referred in the first place. So let's say a family physician decides to refer a patient to a physiotherapist now for an exercise prescription, maybe to lower their BMI, maybe to lower their blood pressure. It could be to maybe help lower their blood sugar count, etc. And of course, this needs analysis will also be based on results from testing. So you might have tested your A1C. That's going to be later on, right? You might have tested your HbA1c, your blood triglycerides, maybe your bone mineral density, etc. So these screens and tests will actually help inform the actual needs analysis. What is the patient looking like, the overall clinical picture of the patient? And of course, you're going to do a few other measurements as well. So things such as growth measurements, waist to hip ratio, which I believe Dr. Callender would have mentioned those, your actual body weight, of course, BMI, and of course, your other functional measures such as your strength and endurance. But of course, you also want to factor in what the patient has to say. So you might give the patient a few wellness questionnaires. Let's see what's the patient's general lifestyle like. You're going to give what's called a physical activity readiness questionnaire, which is a PARQ. That basically screens out the person in terms of having anything that should warrant any further, so let's say, cardiac testing before they begin an actual exercise program. You want to actually ascertain the patient's goals, their personal goals. So for example, now, do they want to look better, feel better, and so on, in addition to, of course, the clinical goals. And of course, you might do a little bit of motivational interviewing to kind of have an idea where's the patient's headspace at currently before they begin an exercise program. And having said that, having handled information available to you, begin prescribing an exercise program. So when it comes to designing an exercise prescription, there are essentially four principles, 4 components, and the acronym for those is FIT, which is very appropriate, F-I-T-T, with the F meaning your frequency of training, I, intensity of training, the first T, which is usually time or duration of training. There's a slight distinction when it comes to your resistance training, which I'll explain later on. And of course, the second T, which is your type of training. So back to the F, frequency. That's basically how often you train, depending on the type of exercise. So the WHO activity, physical activity guidelines, they recommend at least 150 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic physical activity, or usually aerobic exercise throughout the week. That's a moderate level. They also recommend maybe 75 minutes of vigorous intensity aerobic activity throughout the week. In fact, I think what's ideal is to actually have some moderate and some vigorous to actually get to maximum health benefits. So those are for aerobic exercise. For your strength training or resistance training exercise now, a minimum of 2 days per week or at least 3 days per week. So that's for frequency. Intensity. Intensity is essentially how hard is the exercise program. And there are actually a few health benefits to actually increasing the intensity of an exercise program, of course, up to a certain point, only up to a certain point, and not beyond. And of course, there are going to be several methods of actually measuring intensity, depending on the kind of exercise. So aerobic exercises have a particular way of measuring intensity, resistance training, their own way as well. Oops, beg your pardon. Then the first T, time, which as I mentioned, is basically how long is the exercise program. When it comes to resistance training, we're not looking so much at how long is the program, but we look at maybe how much you're doing in the program, meaning the number of sets, the number of reps, which we call the volume. We more look at that than actual time. But what is important is that there's really an inverse relationship between intensity, which is the weight that you're going to be lifting, and the volume, meaning the more weight you're lifting is really the less you're going to be doing. So that's just a very practical takeaway there. And then of course, there's a type of exercise, otherwise known as exercise selection. So for one thing, whether it's aerobic training or strength training, there's of course a need for both. But even within each of those fields, aerobic and strength training, there are different types within those. So we look at those further on. All right. So again, as a recap, the components of exercise program: FIT, F-I-T-T. That should be fairly easy to remember, and that might be important later on. All right. So having said that, there are really multiple ways to go about designing an overall exercise prescription. Again, you can combine aerobics and strength training. Well, of course, there can be different needs for time. In the interest of time, in terms of the patients, and also in the interest of this presentation, I only have a certain amount of limited time. I'm going to focus on one method of exercise and exercise prescription. But it's one modality of exercise that I believe can actually improve both bone health and muscle health, and depending on how it is programmed, can actually help with BMI as well. And that mode, which you might have figured out by now, is of course resistance training or strength training, otherwise known as weight training. So resistance training essentially is training using resistance. Apologies for having to use the same word to define it, but essentially using different modes of resistance, whether it is elastic resistance, as we're seeing here in the middle, moderate resistance, free weights. Some person may actually use maybe odd objects, maybe asymmetrical objects as a form of resistance, or even water. Water is actually a form of resistance as well. So these are different sources of resistance, and the resistance training is essentially exercise that's using these methods of resistance to create your different changes, especially physical changes, metabolic changes, and also functional and performance-related changes. Here we go. All right. So benefits of resistance training, as I mentioned, we have physical or structural changes, some more extreme than others. But of course, it is known that resistance training produces increased muscle mass and increased cross-sectional area. So I'm kind of highlighting the ACSN's position statement on resistance exercise. And by the way, I can provide all these sources if anyone requests. And also position statements from the National Strength and Conditioning Association. And there's also improved bone mineral density. And there's a particular study I want to highlight here, which is appropriately called the Lift More trial, which is based in Australia. And that's for lifting intervention for training muscle and osteoporosis rehabilitation. Essentially what they found in this trial was that high intensity can be relative. Essentially, heavyweight training and impact exercises performed by postmenopausal women was actually effective and actually safe for improving their bone mineral density. So in other words, it's not just about lifting light weights or high reps, even for postmenopausal women. So that's the Lift More trial. Definitely want to highlight that. So again, increased muscle mass, improved bone mineral density. In terms of metabolic changes now, there's increased intramuscular metabolic enzymes. So that's going to have implications, for example, now in managing blood sugar. And it's also going to be an increased metabolic rate. So for example, now, and I think Dr. Callender mentioned that, just having a greater amount of muscle mass to some extent increases your basal metabolic rate, also your metabolic rate even with activity. So it's going to lead to greater caloric expenditure, which of course is important for managing your BMI. Then of course, there are going to be functional and performance related changes. So for example, now increased strength, increased power, increased endurance, all those things which I referenced before, and improved capacity for work. So getting through more of your activities of daily living without the need for rest, and also lower risk of injuries. I should have mentioned that as well. And of course, there's going to be improved balance and stability. So having said that, and having highlighted resistance training as an exercise method, let's look at the resistance training exercise prescription itself. So I've been doing a lot of talking, I believe. Well, let me just recap right here, or FITT. So we're going to look at how that applies to resistance training. Right. I'm going to show a few demonstrations in a few, just to kind of give it a break from my voice. Okay, so again, looking at our exercise prescription frequency, as recommended by the World Health Organization, and I believe the ACSM as well, 2 or 3 days per week minimum. And this is just for your general health. Of course, if you have athletic pursuits, you're going to want to be training more often. The intensity, which is actually the weight or load. Now, for us, how we measure intensity, we use what's called a percentage of what's called the 1 repetition maximum. The 1 repetition maximum, the 1 RM, that's the maximum weight that you can lift 1 time and only 1 time. You can't lift a second or a third time, all right? So that's the load or intensity. Now, of course, the load or intensity is going to be chosen by the exercise prescription professional. So that could be a physiotherapist, of course, especially in our context, maybe an exercise physiologist, etc. They're going to be selecting the percentage of the 1 RM based on the particular goals. So for example, what has been found is that higher loads, meaning higher percentages of this 1 RM figure, that's going to be more geared towards developing strength. Lower loads on the other end of the spectrum, those tend to be developing muscular endurance. Then kind of in between your mid-range, going to be developing your muscle mass. So yes, there's a correlation between muscle mass and strength, but there's also a part where you can actually improve your strength beyond your muscle mass improvements. That's a whole other thing, but this is not going to be an exercise science class, so I'm just going to keep it simple here. Now, of course, I mentioned the percentage of 1 RM for exercise intensity, but intensity can also be measured somewhat subjectively using what's called the RPE, the rating of perceived exertion. So you basically ask the patient, how hard does this exercise feel to you? Right? And there's a modified RPE scale, which is going to be a scale from 0 to 10. So basically on a scale of 0 to 10, how hard does this exercise feel to you? 5 out of 10, okay, fine, we need to increase it, something like that, for example. All right. As I mentioned, time with resistance training, we'll look at the volume, so we look at the total sets and reps. And again, the greater the weight that you're lifting, the less volume that you're really lifting. And of course, then there's your type. And as I just showed you previously, there are several types of resistance in terms of the source of resistance. There are also different types of muscle action. So we're doing an isometric exercise, an eccentric exercise, etc. And also different types of training systems when it comes to actually structuring the program. So we're going to look at one particular system today. Okay? Now, just made a note in terms of your exercise prescription, especially the resistance training exercise prescription. Again, this is going to be something that's going to be put together by a professional, such as a physiotherapist, and that person will actually take multiple factors into account. So things like the patient's current fitness level, medical history, of course, and any physical limitations, the exercise history or perhaps the lack thereof, and of course, basically what the referring physician would have perhaps said. And of course, again, the patient's own goals. I'm going to take these all together to create a prescription. Now, I showed you that heavy weights are going to be for strength, lighter weights for muscular endurance, etc. But in general, anyone starts with an exercise program, you're going to start at the lower end of the spectrum and work your way up. All right, so with all that extra talking, let me get into a bit of practicality right here. So here's one example of a simple, let's say a simple exercise that we can maybe do for a resistance training exercise prescription. This exercise is called a single leg stance contralateral kettlebell shoulder press. Sounds like a mouthful, but essentially the person is standing on one leg. Let me kind of get the video going. She's standing on one leg, her right leg in this case, one leg extremity, while lifting the weight in her opposite or contralateral arm. What she's lifting is what's called a kettlebell. So it's a little different from a standard dumbbell in that it's actually an asymmetrical load, which in and of itself is beneficial. So your dumbbells are symmetrical, they have a certain benefit, but kettlebells not, because they're asymmetrical. Just holding and lifting a kettlebell now, you're now recruiting a number of other muscles, stabilizing muscles, etc. So look at things in terms of the muscle health. Again, there's your upper extremity strengthening. There's going to be some muscle building and so on, and muscular endurance depending on how much weight I give her, etc. And of course, because she's standing on a single leg, there's also going to be hip and lower extremity strengthening. So we're looking at the gluteal muscles, and of course, the quads and hamstrings. And not to be overlooked are the muscles of the foot, the intrinsic muscles of the foot, which are going to be important for stabilizing her entire lower extremity. There's also a functional training benefit in that because she's standing on one leg, but lifting the weight in the other leg, lifting the weight in the opposite arm, so she's going across the midline, so to speak. So her trunk stabilizing muscles have to work a little bit harder just to maintain that position. And of course, we can't overlook the benefits on bone. She's getting weight bearing through her lumbar spine and the hip joint, of course, standing on that one leg, but also because she's lifting that weight with her arm, she's going to be having some amount of weight bearing through the wrist joint as well. I mentioned the L-spine, hip joint, and the wrist joint in particular because those are the points that are looked at on DEXA scans in terms of monitoring your bone mineral density. Then, of course, it's also muscle action on bone. So in addition to weight bearing, increasing bone mineral density, just having muscles actually pull on bone, actual active muscle contractions pulling on bone, that actually adds to increasing bone mineral density as well. All right, so that was just one example of, let us say, an exercise, a somewhat complex exercise with multiple benefits in terms of health. Now, as I mentioned before, there are different types of resistance training, the different types of exercise that can be done, different types of resistance, and also different types of training systems. So what I'm going to mention here is one particular system of resistance training that I believe can actually help to address all the factors in one. So your muscle health, your bone health, and also your BMI, almost as an only one exercise prescription, so to speak. And Dr. Callender kind of referenced it from me earlier. Thank you very much. That's going to be circuit training, or specifically in this case, circuit resistance training. So with that circuit, with circuit training, essentially what you're doing, you're cycling through multiple exercises done sequentially with continuous movement for the most part, with minimal or even no rest between exercises. And you don't rest until maybe you finish one round of the circuit, you stop, catch your breath, and then you go again. Now, what's the benefit of that? Basically, because you have that continuous movement, there's greater caloric expenditure, both during exercise and even after the exercise. So of course, there's going to be a metabolic benefit, there's going to be a cardiovascular benefit, and of course, there's going to be the strengthening benefit. So having said that, let's look at an example. I hope the video plays back well. But what I'm going to highlight here is an example of what's called a lower body circuit. Can you guys see my screen clearly? I think my thing's being blocked off here. Hopefully you can see that clearly. Oh yes, so this is an example of a lower body or lower extremity circuit. She's going to be doing 4 exercises sequenced, starting with what's called a leg press, then a supported squat, then what's called a deadlift. Not sure if all of us are familiar with what's called a deadlift. It might sound deadly to you, but it's not really. And then of course, what's called a hip thrust, or otherwise known as a hip bridge. So let me go ahead and play this video, and I'll speak as she's demonstrating. So what she's doing here is the leg press. As you can see, she's actually pushing the weight with both legs. You can't really see from here, but there's a particular weight that's selected. So she's actually lifting that weight using both of the extremities. And again, because it's a circuit, she's going to be going from one exercise to the next one, doing one set of each exercise as she cycles through. Now she'll do the supported squat. In this case, now with the squat, she's only lifting just her body weight supported. She's not supported on the exercise bar right here, which of course is against the wall. So this is an example of a fairly simple circuit that can be done for someone more or less just starting a resistance training program. And right now, we're actually focusing on just the lower extremities. This now is a deadlift, where you're basically lifting a weight that's supposed to be a dead weight and just lifting it from the floor and up. Now, technically, she shouldn't really be bending her arms. She should actually be staying straight, but she should just learn the exercise. And it's a 10-pound weight, so I'm not really worried. If that were a 50-pound weight, then I'd be concerned about her bending her arms. But essentially, that's a deadlift. As you can see, she's going into a squat and picking the weight up from the floor. Then, of course, the last exercise, that's going to be the hip thrust or the hip bridge on the bench. Let me just back up a little bit. Oops, that's the deadlift. Right, so essentially, it's going into a hip extension movement, which is going to be targeting the gluteal muscles. Hope that didn't go by too fast, but that's essentially an example of our circuit resistance training. Skip forward. All right, so what's the benefit of doing that? Again, we're getting both lower extremity and trunk strengthening because of the variety of exercises. So the hips are getting involved, thigh and calf muscles, and also the trunk muscles. If you think of, for example, the leg press and even the squat, those muscles are going to be recruited as well. Then, of course, it's going to be your muscle mass building in addition to strengthening. As I mentioned, trunk strengthening as well. And of course, your functional performance training. So if you look at something like deadlift, you're not training or retraining your patient to be able to pick up an object from the floor, for example, especially using proper lifting technique, hopefully. And then, of course, now what we saw here was just her lifting at a regular moderate pace. Now, if I wanted to develop power, for example, again, I mentioned that power is actually an important component to train. I'd actually having her perform this exercise now a bit more quickly, especially the deadlift, a little bit more quickly, not with the same heavy weight, but a little more quickly to actually get that power training going. So again, we can think of this circuit resistance training, or CRT, almost as an all-in-one prescription. Now, I just mentioned muscle health benefits. Let's look at bone health. Again, weight bearing through the lumbar spine, etc. And of course, there's lower extremity action on bones. So these are just like the previous example I showed you. But one unique benefit with the circuit resistance training is the benefit on the BMI. Because we're doing multiple movements with large muscle groups, and we're going from one movement to the other movement, that's more calories being burned than with that constant movement. So in a way, you're almost getting a bit of an aerobic benefit in addition to your strengthening benefit. So we can see that how it's going to be beneficial right there. So that's why I think of circuit resistance training as an all-in-one exercise prescription, so to speak. Now, my focus will tend to be resistance training, of course, but I'm not going to overload the other aspects of exercise prescription. But a couple of things to look at are that the design of the program, meaning how the program is set up, is actually very important. It's also the type of exercises that are chosen, the sets and reps, the volume, etc. So one thing that's important, for example, now is that depending on the goals, you want to make sure that you're having enough weight, enough resistance in the training, in the exercises, to actually have loading of muscle, loading of bone, etc. But at the same time, you also want to have enough volume to actually be burning calories in terms of your BMI improvement. So it's going to be important for the exercise prescription professional to actually bear in mind. What's helpful with that now is actually take different approaches from time to time. So maybe one session today we might be focusing on strength. The next session now maybe focusing on endurance, etc. And generally, in designing overall exercise prescription, you want to take a big picture view. So we're not just focusing on one thing. Look at the patient's overall picture in terms of the entire lifestyle, and really thinking long term, really thinking long range. I haven't mentioned flexibility up until now. Just kind of mentioning flexibility. You do want to have the patients performing exercise with a full range of motion. So for example, if you think of the squat as she did earlier, the supported squat, if I encourage her to go through her full range of motion, now that is now mobilized the hip joints. We tend to get very tight in the hips, especially from all the sitting and so on. Going through an exercise like that, and especially even the hip thrust, the hip bridge on the bench, going through those kind of exercises will actually help to promote flexibility. And of course, even adding in some stretching as necessary. And then, of course, you do need to have cardio. You know, I'm really emphasizing the resistance training. You do need to have some amount of cardio training, some amount of aerobic exercise. And the reason for that is that combining resistance training with aerobic exercise, again, taking a big picture view, that's actually far more effective. Now, you want to actually promote increasing physical activity in general. So it's one thing for the patient to be coming to you for exercise maybe 2 to 3 times a week. Well, what are they doing the rest of the time? They might be sitting and being very sedentary, which kind of actually has been found to counteract the actual benefits that you're trying to get. So you don't really want to just rely on the exercise sessions, which is, again, that might be only 2 to 3 times per week. So you want to promote generally increasing physical activity, and one effective way to do that is by walking. Dr. Callender mentioned it, I'm going to reinforce it. Just increasing the general walking, that can actually be, actually has been found, beg your pardon, actually has been found to increase your overall caloric expenditure, has been found to actually help with weight management. And what's been recommended is to actually accumulate 10,000 steps per day. Now, you might need to wear like a Fitbit or some kind of pedometer or something to actually measure the number of steps, but that alone has been found to have a significant benefit in terms of your overall weight management. And again, benefits with walking, it's a low-level way of actually training some muscular endurance, but then also looking at bone health, you're actually getting what's called cyclical loading, meaning loading and unloading of bone, which has been found to actually benefit bone health quite a bit. And of course, as I mentioned, the overall weekly caloric expenditure. Again, thinking big picture, not just what you're doing each day, but think over the course of weeks or the course of months. And of course, can't deny benefits in terms of cardiovascular health and even psychological health in terms of benefits of walking. Right, okay. I was going to make a little note about aerobic exercise here, just kind of checking my time. I think I'm a little bit over time, but I want to show one other form of aerobic exercise. So when we think of aerobic exercise, we tend to think of things like walking, which are like continuous exercise done over a period of time. But what has been found is that you can actually do what's called interval training, where you're doing different bouts of exercise. So you're doing higher intensity or faster exercise alternated by slower exercise. So fast, slow, fast, slow. And that in and of itself has been found to have certain benefits in terms of training the cardiovascular system and also in terms of caloric expenditure, etc. So without further ado, let's go ahead and show the demonstration. This was called the battle ropes. It's called battle ropes. It's technically the rated one rope, but it's called the battle ropes. So I turn it down a little bit. All right. So what she's doing, she's standing up and she's actually moving the ropes with her arms. And she switches the technique after a while. So this is something that might be done for maybe 20 seconds, 30 seconds at a time. I might maybe alternate this now with another activity. Right. So she might do this and alternate with another activity. So for example, now she could do one round of battle ropes, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, followed up maybe a slow walk around the gym or something like that. And then come back again, battle ropes, and then walk around the gym. So that's another way of getting some aerobic exercise, but also improving, actually also increasing a bit of strengthening as well, especially the muscular endurance in this case. So when we think of aerobic training, yes, your regular walking, jogging, etc., those are good, even swimming and so on. But we can also do training like this, battle ropes, for example, and other methods of interval training. All right. So in summary, I don't realize I'm actually over time, but thank you for your patience. But yes, in summary, basically what I did was review bone health, muscle health, and BMI in terms of our definitions. We looked at our exercise prescription. What is it? And why do we need exercise prescription? The components of an exercise prescription, which of course that's going to be your FITT. Then I mentioned about the role of the exercise prescription professional. So in our context in Jamaica, that will basically be the physiotherapist. I'm not sure if we have exercise physiologists here, maybe, but those will be other persons. And even just a well-versed trainer in the gym could potentially do that, but you want to have your clinician involved, such as a physiotherapist. Then we spent some time speaking about the resistance training, exercise prescription in particular. And we mentioned about circuit resistance training as one very effective method to address bone health, muscle health, as well as your BMI. And then of course, now we look at other aspects of the exercise prescription. And again, I want to emphasize taking a big picture view and looking at it from a long range view. And really just trying to increase your overall, in addition to your exercise program, yes, trying to increase your overall physical activity in general. All right. So my references, again, I can provide some of these references if you need. I just want to make special thanks to Gail and to Anna K. Share my contact information, so you guys are free to contact me, of course. And I guess that's going to be it. And thank you very much.
Thank you
for your patience.
Thank you very much too, Dr. Brown. We have certainly benefited from this discussion this evening, which has covered and brought to our attention how to exercise, why we need to exercise, and how best to coordinate our exercise that we do for ourselves and for our patients. If there's one thing that, 3 or 4 points to remember, the exercise prescription, let's take that away. Bone health, muscle health, lower the BMI. And then we come to the fit. We're not to leave out frequency of training, intensity, time, and type of exercise. And so you go to that, and then you move on to how to put this, how to do this, and in the various types. And you mentioned to us that if there's one thing that can do everything for us, it's the circuit resistance training.
Yes.
So we are to go to that, and we are also to remember the physicality in general. We are to, outside of those times which we ask our patients to exercise or we exercise, we are generally speaking to try to walk and not ride. Yes?
Where possible, yes.
So walking, both yourself and Dr. Callender have spoken of the benefits of walking.
Yes.
And you mentioned walking 10,000 steps per day and wearing a Fitbit. So, and the last thing would have been the interval training. I think to mention the fast and the slow and the strength versus aerobic all at once. We thank you very, very much for your thoroughness and for making the time to come and share and bring this to us. For many of us, we have never heard it. We've never heard some of this. And for those of us who have heard before, we have not heard it in quite this way. So we thank you very much again, Dr. Brown.
Okay. You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yes, have a good evening now.
Same to you. Thank you.
Welcome. And we will move on to our next presenter, who is Dr. Alicia Hayman, who is not a regular person at all. She is a special, special person. She is a natural resource management specialist, and she has a specialty area. Her specialty area is geography. She has a doctoral specialization in geography. Dr. Hayman is a Commonwealth Scholar, an Ontario Graduate Scholar, and a Cecil Franklin Fellow in Soil and Water Conservation. And she has over 24 years of work experience in thematic areas, including watershed and protected areas management, climate change and energy, yes. So this is all of the areas in which she has such great experience. She's also involved in many climate change initiatives, and has teaching experience with global climate change at the undergraduate level, and she's administered training at the national and at the local levels. She has undertaken project design for national and Caribbean regional projects, and she has conducted research on the impact of climate change on agriculture. So, you know, we have become, during the last couple of years, very much aware of the interdependence of climate and of food and of the One Health idea, that we have to complement each other at all times, otherwise no area will prosper. She has been involved with the Caribbean region-wide climate and protected areas financing initiatives. So let me move down this, where I'm looking at her. She's just so experienced. She's worked in Africa, in the Pacific, and in other countries also. And she's worked with various international donor partners, especially in the area of monitoring and evaluation in watershed and protected areas management and climate change mitigation and adaptation. Thematic areas. She served as USAID Jamaica EC led consultant in Jamaica. She's assisted in developing its work program on climate change with the government of Jamaica. So this Dr. Hayman is an extremely knowledgeable and experienced presenter. She comes to us today to talk with us on the impact of climate change on health. And this has been big. We've been dealing with this all year. We've been dealing with this through what's been happening in St. Vincent and what's been happening with the hurricanes and the earthquakes, of course, in Haiti. So it's a big area. And we wanted this time to welcome Dr. Alicia Hayman. Dr. Hayman, please, it is over to you. Impact of climate change on health. Thank you. Dr. Hayman?
I'm not seeing Dr. Hayman at the moment. 1 second. I see. Dr. Hayman, can you please click on accepting to be promoted to a panelist, please? Thank you. All right, Dr. Hayman, over to you.
Are you hearing me?
Hearing you now, yes.
Great, great. Yes, so thank you very much. Thanks for having me today amongst your very astute presenters. Thanks to the Caribbean College of Family Physicians Jamaica chapter for the invitation, and thanks to Dr. Brown Morgan for the introduction. And as Dr. Brown Morgan said, I'm coming to you from a totally different angle. You know, she said one thing that already stood out, the One Health approach, and also the intersectoral nature of climate change. And I'm sure everybody, if not before, now you have been hearing about climate change. And, you know, in the last month or so, we had the Conference of Parties in Glasgow. And out of that, you know, a whole lot was happening. We saw a lot in the media during that month. Of activities. So I am going to go straight into my presentation for today. Are you seeing my screen?
Did you click on share screen?
Let me go back. So I didn't see a share screen.
No problem. I have a copy of it. I can share it
No,
for you.
now. I'm there now.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
No problem. So it's share screen, and then you'll see screen at the top left. You can double click on it or just click on the share button at the bottom right. Should be on a screen that says basic. I'm not sure if when it came up you see advanced or files. Let me know what you're seeing.
Okay, I see it now.
No problem.
Okay.
Perfect. Awesome.
All right, so here we
Also,
are.
just a note, we're not seeing you because the light source behind you is a bit brighter than the light source that's facing you. Everyone loves to see you while you're presenting, but I understand if you're more comfortable where you are.
So I'm switching.
Oh, there you go. Hi.
This helps. Yeah, so I've kind of switched around. Okay, all right, let's go because I know we're a little behind time already. So for today's presentation, I'm going to be focusing on a couple of things. First, starting out by defining what is climate change, and then talking a bit about our current and future states of climate. And following this, I'll talk a bit about the current and future impacts of climate change. And finally, you know, we can talk about what is climate change and what are the impacts, but we have to think about what are we going to do about it, because climate change is really, in large part, a negative thing. And so the question is really, what are we going to do? So I will close off with talking about climate action, what we're doing now, and really what are the kind of things that we need to do to both adapt to and mitigate against climate change. So to start off, what is climate change? So we often interchange climate change and global warming, and we say the same, we say them interchangeably, mean the same thing, but they're very, very different. And we do that with weather and climate as well, where we sometimes confuse the two. Weather is more short-term, occurring over very short periods of time, whether from minutes to hours to days. And while on the other hand, climate is referring to long-term regional or even global trends of temperature, average temperature, humidity, rainfall patterns over seasons, years, or even decades. So climate change is a long-term change in the average weather patterns that have come to define the Earth's local, regional, and global climates. And these changes have a broad range of observed effects that are synonymous with the term climate change. So our climate is changing, and it's changing in a very unpredictable way. It's not behaving the way it used to. Before, we could say, well, this is what it looked like, and this is what we can expect. But we're having so many changes now, and it's really, really uncertain and unpredictable. So some of the things we notice, and you can even think about in your own lives, some of these things, what you see. Put aside using your air conditioning unit and just think about, just every day, just how things are. Hotter days, we have hot days, hot nights. Prior to the Conference of Parties that was held recently, there was an assessment report called AR6. And out of that report, one of the key findings was that by the early 2030s, we're going to be seeing that we have exceeded the 1.5 degrees increase since pre-industrial times. Now, I'm sure you would have heard 1.5 to stay alive. Have you heard of that before? That's been one of those slogans that's been used in recent times. And what they're seeing is that based on the projections, we are going to be exceeding that 1.5. And 1.5 is a whole lot. That's a lot of more heat, hotter times. And at the same time, we're also seeing that rainfall is more variable. So what we see is that some places are wetter, some places are drier. We also see, and Dr. Brown Morgan mentioned that, the more extremes, we're seeing these Category 5 hurricanes, and we're seeing these big drought periods. We're seeing higher sea levels. Sea level rise is also affecting us. And you think of places like Hellshire, you think of South St. Elizabeth, where we see sea level rise being a major issue that's causing a lot of coastal erosion and loss of beach space. So we're climate sensitive. So that's what Jamaica is. And we are patterns of livelihoods. We pattern our lives around climate, everything we do. We live on steep slopes, or we live in the limited coastal plains. Or productivity and quality of life is also based around climate. So our economy, agriculture, tourism, fisheries, for example. When we think of our health and well-being, diseases, recreation, and we think of critical livelihood sectors like water. Water is so important to everything that we do. It's all bound up, all related to climate. And our development is predicated on having very good, very favorable and predictable climate. However, what we're seeing now as climate change is making climate less and less predictable. And with that, it means that it's getting harder and harder for climate sensitive sectors like agriculture, like tourism, like health, like social services in their current form to deliver the kind of national growth and contribution to national development like we want them to. So in terms of national development, we find that climate is unpredictable, and we find that climate sensitive sectors are now becoming unreliable partners in pursuit of development. So because they're unpredictable, we can't set the kind of targets that we would necessarily want based on what we're seeing happening already. So in years to come, we also see that we will still have that kind of trend and even more. So what we have is that we've been using models. So scientists use observations from the ground, from the air, from sea, wherever, and using those and plugging in theoretical models we can project for the future. So as it is now, we have what we call state of the climate reports. We have them for Jamaica, we have them for the Caribbean, and those reports give us a good idea of the future projections of climate and climate in relation to temperature, rainfall, the extremes, sea level rise. And so what we'd have projections to 2030, to 2050, to 2100. And with that, it's supposed to help us to be better able to plan. So because the climate is changing at a rate that is unprecedented in an unpredictable way, our ability to plan and to prepare for those are really not going as fast as the changes are happening. And so it creates such a huge challenge for us now in terms of how do we prepare? What do we need to do to be able to deal with the unprecedented and the uncertainty? So for the future, given what we see, we'll go into even hotter times. And I mentioned that by a little over 2030, which is 2030 is just almost 8 years away. That's not far. And by then we're going to be seeing that we are going to much hotter times. You know, believe me, 1.5 degrees is a lot hotter. And I was in a meeting recently with the World Met Organization, and they're already seeing that in the past few years, we're seeing that we're edging closer to that 1.5. So who knows, we may be getting there even before the mid-2030s. We also will have even drier conditions, and it's being projected that we'll be up to 30% drier. We're going to have shorter rain seasons, longer and more severe droughts, more intense extremes. So what we'll find is, you know, when the projections come out for the annual hurricane season, you'll find there may be less number of hurricanes, but a lot more that are in the higher categories, category 4, category 5, which as we know, are extremely, extremely devastating. And we'll also see where we will have even higher sea level rise. And just to give you an idea, if we think about an impact from a 2-meter sea level rise on Jamaica, we know, you know, we're very close, we're coastal. A lot of the population live within coastal areas. And so we'll have a 1% land area lost, which means we'll have people being displaced, resorts, and we know our resorts are mostly on the coast. We'll have tourism resorts damaged. We'll have loss and damage. We know our airports are also on the coast. We think about loss of roads, infrastructure, and so that can be extremely devastating. And so that's something that we need to be planning for. So we see what's happening now, and we see what is to come. And what is to come isn't what we have now. It's actually worse than what we have now. And so our planning really need to really kick in. Planning nationally, locally, and even at the individual level. So we think of the unprecedented climate, and we think also it would have unprecedented impacts. And we think about impact on health. So health-related deaths, infectious diseases, air quality, and respiratory illnesses. Earlier we talked about, you know, how we link food to health. And we think about food and nutrition security. And, you know, in the last year and a half, 2 years with the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw where we had food scarcity, we had a whole lot of issues with food. And when we have those kinds of issues, they are gonna affect our health. So issues with water deficit, when we think about, even though in Jamaica, largely on a whole, we have enough water, but the ability to deliver safe and adequate water to everyone is gonna be an issue. Same as I said with agriculture, and so that's gonna be a challenge to food security and nutrition. Already, we have a food import bill of close to $1 billion. And $1 billion or so, you know, when you think about that, what are we doing, or what can we do to reduce that? But then what can we do to make sure that we, the people, we are able to get the food we need in the quantities and the quality. And we heard the two presentations before, especially listening to Dr. Callender, the kinds of foods that we want. We need to think about how we are going to be producing those kinds of foods. And quality of life, when we think about after a hurricane, after a storm, the conditions are harsh for many, and we have loss of livelihoods. You think about the people who are, especially those on the coast, you know, you think about persons who've lost their roofs, lost their homes. And so it's a challenge to inadequate social conditions. You think about heat stress, because when we think about the whole issue of a 1.5 degrees increase, that's a lot. And we already have significant heat issues. You hear, oh, it's so hot, it's hot, it's hot. And even in November, you had days when it's so intense, the heat is intense. And heat stress is one of those big issues that is affecting us and will continue to affect us. And particularly vulnerable groups would include the elderly, those persons with pre-existing conditions like diabetes, those who are socially isolated. And the impacts can range from heat rash all the way to stroke or death. When we think of NCDs and food and nutrition security, the majority of small island states like Jamaica face the triple burden of malnutrition, where undernutrition, micronutrient deficiencies, and overweight and obesity exist simultaneously within the population alongside the increasing rate of diet-related NCDs. And so climate change is likely to exacerbate the triple burden of malnutrition and the metabolic and lifestyle risk factors for diet-related NCDs. It is expected that it will reduce the short and long-term food and nutrition security, both directly through its effects on agriculture and fisheries, and indirectly by contributing to underlying risk factors such as water insecurity, dependency on imported foods, urbanization, migration, and health service disruption. And we know that, you know, in an already overburdened health system, we see that this risk is also distributed unevenly, with some population groups experiencing greater vulnerability to climate change. And then just to talk a little bit about infectious and vector-borne diseases, some of the world's most virulent infections are also highly sensitive to climate. That is temperature, precipitation, and humidity. They all have strong influence on the life cycle of vectors and the infectious agents they carry, and they influence the transmission of water and foodborne diseases. So increasing temperatures increases the available habitat for the dengue fever vector, that's it, the Aedes aegypti mosquito, while concurrently increases both the longevity of the virus and the mosquito. So if temperature increases by, say, 3 degrees, the mean incidence rate during any epidemic of dengue can double. That is, we have shorter stages of development, but increased population growth. Rainfall, so where we saw that we'll have that variability in rainfall, sometimes more rainfall, it also increases breeding sources. So there's a correlation in studies that have found that dengue fever cases, the risk of dengue is inversely associated with the duration of sunshine. Sorry. So while I'm not going to focus much on animal health, I just wanted to put in too that heat stress is also very, very important issue to animals. And we see where it's already happening here in Jamaica and in the Caribbean, where heat stress is affecting animal production and productivity. And so we see where there's a reduction in productivity. And so that, again, like I said, would have its own impact on human health in terms of what we're able to get in terms of our protein. And so unprecedented climate, we have unprecedented impacts. a whole lot of different kinds of impacts, natural, social, direct, indirect. And so these are all the kinds of things that we need to be thinking about. And so it's these important sectors, and I mentioned climate sensitive sectors, they're becoming unreliable partners in the pursuit of growth and development. And with the unprecedented changes in climate, these sensitive sectors will become more unproductive partners in the pursuit for growth and development. So what do we do? And so that's the big question. Where do we go from here? We have to take action. And taking action, there are a number of areas where we need to take urgent action. So there are 3 key areas that we think about when we're thinking about dealing with the impacts of climate change. We think about mitigation, which is changing what we do, changing our practices to reduce the amount of greenhouse gases that we put in the atmosphere. Earlier, I mentioned global warming, and so the more of the greenhouse gases that go in the atmosphere, that's contributing to global warming. So that's one area that we can work on. Then we can work on adaptation. It's really the changes that we do to allow us to more than cope, but more in a longer term, allow us to live within a changed climate. And so these are the kinds of things, and later on, I'll talk about some of the things that we're doing in Jamaica for that. And finally, education, very, very important. Education is engendering behavioral change, how we change what we do to be able to deal with the impacts of climate change. So again, mitigation. So examples of mitigation actions, reducing emissions. And we think about things like, here using renewables. And that's one I'm gonna talk a little bit on, go into some examples of the use of renewables and even transportation efficiencies. In terms of adaptation, we think of early warning and climate systems and climate services. We think about the research that we do, being able to do the climate vulnerability assessments in order to inform and to make these informed decisions on how we're going to adapt. And finally, like I said, these kinds of actions are building climate resilient and low carbon in terms of reducing the greenhouse gas emissions to climate change. So here I have some examples of actions these are resilient actions for climate change. And these would include, we said this very early, an interdisciplinary, intersectoral approach where the health sector is interlinked and working closely with other sectors. We talk about health adaptation plans to advance national climate change and health prioritization and financing. So once we have done what we call the vulnerability assessments, then we're able to make these informed decisions and develop these adaptation plans that craft out and basically define how we are adapting to these impacts of climate change. Raising awareness is another, and raising awareness at different levels, at the policy level, at the local level, and at the individual level in communities. Increased capacity to measure the health co-benefits of climate mitigation. So climate mitigation, as I mentioned, are things to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And I'll give the examples a little later in a couple slides later on what we are doing with climate mitigation. And mitigation right now, every country all the parties to the what's called the Paris Agreement, which is that climate agreement, all the parties would have a responsibility every 5 years to basically define their ambition for mitigation. What are they going to be doing to reduce greenhouse gases? And we would have submitted our first one. Jamaica submitted the first one in 2015, and we submitted our second one, or update, in 2020. So in that document, we define how we're going to mitigate and how we're going to adapt. Strengthening things like water, sanitation, food system to be more resilient. We talk about those being very, very important, especially to the health sector. national climate-informed disease surveillance and modeling systems. Those are very important. You think about the vectors I just mentioned earlier. Having climate change and health leaders. So persons within the health sector being very aware of and understand climate change and how to really determine what ways to adapt and to mitigate against it. And things like heat stress early warning system will be important, not just for, it says livestock here, but not just for livestock, but even for people, for humans, because you know, we're going to be feeling it. And we see in some other countries, we see in the USA, for example, we see how heat stress is really killing a lot of people. You think of places like Arizona, where the temperature gets to like 110 degrees and what happens. Now, recently, and this study, this document came out just last month in November. So Jamaica is a participant in a PAHO project, and so has developed the health sector response to climate change. And there is like some kind of a scorecard to measure progress. And within that, there are some key areas that Jamaica is focused on. One is empowerment, that's leadership and governance, looking at developing a national planning for health and climate change, intersectoral collaboration to address climate change, evidence building the investment case. And so when you think about financing for climate change or to address impacts of climate change, most of the funding entities know, and you know, speak to, for example, the Green Climate Fund, which is a huge fund. They want everything you put into any kind of concept or project to be evidence-based. And so the impacts of climate change on health, and really how you look at the projections and determine what your actions will be, it's going to be really dependent on the data, very important to use data to determine, so it has to be evidence-based. Also looking at implementation, preparedness for climate risks. So things like having a monitoring system in place, monitoring system that includes meteorological information. And that's very important. That's again, how the health sector will also link in with the Met Service, because the Met Service provides the climate data, which would be temperature, humidity, precipitation. And so when we look at those, there are opportunities to develop climate services that will serve the health sector. So if it means that we're talking about services to deal with vector-borne diseases, foodborne diseases, whatever it is, even mental health and well-being, those are things that we would need to be looking at addressing climate risks. And then early warning and prevention strategies to reach all the affected populations. Here, this photo is actually in Jamaica. It's actually at one of our hospitals where they are participating in the Smart Healthcare Facility project. I think that is also with PAHO, but others as well, where what this is doing is combining key concepts of safe and green hospitals to make facilities more climate resilient and ensure that health services are provided at especially those dire times, especially say after a hurricane. Are we able to continue to operate in a may not be full in a fulsome way, but operate to be able to deliver services to the people who need it, you know? And so we have those. I think right now there is a project that we have, I think 15 healthcare facilities that are participating in one of these smart healthcare projects. And so it includes things like even rainwater harvesting. So when we have that abundance of rain, how to capture that water, but also not just capturing, but making it potable in a way that it can be used safely. I think looking at things like proper ventilation, making sure that a roof doesn't blow off. I mean, how as much as we can. Again, the unprecedented and the unpredictable ways of that climate change is evolving, then we can go to a certain point, and we hope that that will allow us to be safe enough as we go along. So finally, just to wrap up, so when we think of climate change, there are direct impacts, and then there are those indirect impacts through national systems, impacts through socioeconomic systems on the health sector. And we look at things like social and behavioral contexts and health systems conditions. And so these kinds of health impacts means that we must adapt, we must mitigate against the effects. And so when you think about it, climate change is not only a problem for those after us, those in the future. It's happening, and we know it's happening. And higher temperatures are recorded every year. And if you think about it, think about not even July and August in the heights of the summer, but even other months, you find how hot it is. It's very hot, sometimes unbearable to be outside. And with more persons being affected by disasters, climate sensitive diseases and health conditions. And so climate change exacerbates some existing threats to health and creates new public health challenges, all right? And so the health sector really has an important role to play in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which you saw from the photo. We are starting to do that with some of our health facilities, but we also must adapt to the impacts to make sure that when we build resilience, this is to help our population, to help everyone to be able to keep safe and continue to, so we don't die. You know, those are the kinds of issues we're talking about, to minimize death, to really help us to just keep safe in all of this, and to be able to be comfortably living in a world that has a changing climate, amongst many other things. And with that, I thank you.
Dr. Hayman, we thank you. In fact, you have left us with such a sense of urgency. There's so much to be done. There's so much that needs doing. It's a race against time. We're already in a crisis. This is frightening, and we need to let people know that this needs to be shared with a sense of great urgency, and we need to make not only the medical profession, but all areas, all professions, and everybody aware of this need to promote climate conservation. So we want to thank you. We need to remember 1.5 to stay alive. Let's keep it below 1.5 if possible. And as you said, Jamaica is very sensitive to these climate changes. So we're here as the thermometer. Unprecedented climates lead to unprecedented impacts. We don't need to see anything more. I don't know if you will, my first question to you would, although we're going to go straight into question and answer, but I'd like to know if the tragedy that occurred in the United States yesterday with those cyclones across several states, if that was also somewhat related to climate change. And we're going to open Q&A now, so you could take that, Dr. Hayman, as the first question. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for the question, and I'm not sure I have the answer, but I think, you know, we could be thinking of a combination. So definitely there may be climate-related issues associated with that, but also there will be non-climate issues as well, other externalities that we would have to factor in, just in terms of even just human practices. Some of the kinds of things that we're doing that is really making these cyclones be the way they are, as damaging and destructive. So I think it's a combination of issues we may be talking about.
Okay, thank you so very much for that. We have a question from, is it Sandra McLeod? I think this question is meant for, is it Dr. Callender? As she asked, is there a linear relationship between subcutaneous fat and visceral fat? Is there any relationship, Dr. Callender? Is Dr. Callender with us? If so,
I know Dr. Callender was actually having some issues, Jamaica Public Service
okay.
in her area.
All right, well, can she come back in if she can to answer this question? Because I think this is related to her. And then we go now to Dr. Brown. And this question is from an anonymous attendee asking if you could please repeat the types of resistance exercise that are available and their impact on weight loss. Dr. Brown? Dr. Brown?
I'm back.
Oh, Dr. Callender is back. All right, so we're going to go back.
And the internet, and then flow was down.
All right, so we go back to number one quickly because we have we're going to try and make this as quickly as possible. Linear, is there a linear relationship between subcutaneous fat and visceral fat?
None that I'm aware of. I think it's more a question of genetics and diet, but the whole business of fat distribution is a difficult thing. And the way in which you lose weight also varies. So I would say I know of no linear relationship between subcutaneous and visceral fat.
Okay, thank you for that answer. And back to Dr. Brown, could you repeat the types of resistance exercise that are available and their impact on weight loss in a nutshell?
Seems that Dr. Brown is available at the moment. Doesn't seem that he's available at the moment.
Okay then. Dr. Callender, should a weight loss diet include less protein? From Anonymous.
Less protein. That depends on how much protein you're actually using. I recommend protein with every meal because, as I said, burning protein is more efficient. You use more calories when you burn protein. Protein helps to keep you full, so you need protein with every meal. But again, there's a range of you have to satisfy your protein requirement. Very often in our society, most people are actually having enough protein, but it needs to be assessed whether you should reduce the amount of protein or not. In my experience for weight loss, usually people are not having enough in that initial phase when we want them to lose weight.
And again, for you, Dr. Callender.
Sorry?
What? To complete what you were saying, I have another question for you.
Yeah, I was just going to say usually 1.2 to 1.5 grams per kilogram of ideal body weight. So you really have to assess and then determine whether you need to step up. Very rarely am I stepping down, in all seriousness.
Okay, so protein is very important.
Important for a weight loss program.
A weight loss program, okay.
Yeah.
You were saying it's not the satiety, but it is the it is just providing the calories. You had used some term. You had used a term in relation to using protein in the diet.
Well, the business of satiety.
I said it's a fullness, was it?
Right. There were two things, and I said that you do need some healthy fats, and you need that for satiety to feel as though you've eaten. But you also need protein in order to help to keep you full. So you really want a balanced diet.
Right. And how much, Dr. Callender, I think there are a lot of questions for you. People have real interest here. How much attention do you pay to the glycemic index of foods?
I'm sorry, how much what?
How important is checking the glycemic index of the foods that we eat to our diet? and weight management.
The glycemic index is a concept that I introduce particularly to diabetics, but it's useful for everybody because insulin resistance is a problem when it comes to weight management as well, not just for diabetics. But it's not something that I start off talking about in a weight management program. The usefulness of the glycemic index is that the lower the glycemic index, the less of a spike you get with your blood sugar. And what we want is a steady blood sugar in all cases, whether diabetic or for weight management. But it's not, I don't consider it to be particularly important initially in a weight loss program.
Thank you. Another question from Dr. Paul Brown. Are all saturated fats equally bad? And there is a thinking that the total ban.
I think where we're going with this is that coconut oil has a lot of saturated fat, and that controversy about the benefit of coconut oil. And we know that coconut oil has many benefits. To answer the question, I would say not all saturated fats are bad.
Thank you for that. Dr. Brown, is he back with us at all? Can we have him, or he's gone? Because we have some questions. Dr. Millicent Broderick has a question for Dr. Brown. What type of exercise would he recommend for someone with osteoarthritis of the knees and hip joints, where walking is a problem for those persons?
I don't know if Dr. Brown isn't there. If I would suggest aquatherapy, exercising in water, is amazing for knees, especially people who are overweight, because it takes a lot of the pressure off the joints. If Dr. Brown is back, he's welcome to chime in at any time.
And I guess also
pick it up. But walking is
training.
a weight-bearing exercise.
Yes, resistance training, upper body resistance training, and so forth. We are sorry that we don't have Dr. Brown with us to really fill out that important answer. Dr. Brown again, Paul Brown. We have seen a direct relationship between climate. Oh, this is for Dr. Hayman. We have seen a direct relationship between climate variables and leptospirosis, I guess, cases. Also, environmental factors appear to drive the levels of pathogenicity as well. Are we seeing more aggressive infectious diseases locally? Do you have an answer, Dr. Hayman?
Yes, sorry, I can't say that I've done any research on these. One of the things that I looked at when I looked at this PAHO climate profile that includes some of the things that or actions. I think these are some of the things that we want to be doing in terms of following these, the progression with these, and so it's something that I think it's in the plans to be done. And I'm not sure if anyone in the health ministry or in the sector generally is doing that kind of research, but clearly, definitely, those are things that need to be done. But I can't answer that one, I'm sorry.
Thank you so very much. And the last and final question that we'll take, Dr. Callender, for you. Any thoughts on the use of chromium picolinate in management of, or I guess, of obesity?
So chromium, I've mentioned that insulin resistance is very important, and chromium actually helps in reducing insulin resistance. So it can play an important role as a supplement to reduce that insulin resistance. That's a problem in so many things, such as diabetics, the PCOS, all of that. So it could play a role, yes.
Well, we want to thank you, Dr. Callender, for that. And we want to say thank you to our three incredible presenters today. We had Dr. Joy Callender, who was been with us through thick and thin and is with us today. And her voice seems to have improved. So you gargle and suck that sweet with linctus. Okay then. And we'd like to also thank Dr. Brown, who's not with us. He gave us such a fulsome presentation. And here, Dr. Hayman, who came on board to tell us what's going on and to frighten us into trying to go along with her and help make a difference. So thank you all. And at this point in time, before we have our sponsors presentation, the CCFP will be taking just a few minutes for us all to experience a golden moment. And to say more about this golden moment, I'd like to ask Dr. Sene Onanuju, who is the president of the Caribbean College of Family Physicians Jamaica chapter, to please come, Dr. Sene Onanuju, and take over here. Welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. And I thank all the presenters so very much. And Anna Brown Morgan for such a wonderful, excellent first session of the day. It was really good, and I'm grateful. Today, we are going to talk about the Gold Standard Family Physician Award. Now, the Caribbean College of Family Physicians has always honored members of the college for taking good care of their patients and following the family physician way of health delivery. And also for those physicians who have been very helpful to their communities. Now, this has been going on for over 7 years, and this is very frequent. When the family physician initially was introduced actually in here by our moderator, Anna Brown Morgan, and we are grateful for that. Today, the college will institute its Gold Standard Family Physician Award for the first time. And for that, we have selected two very noteworthy doctors that we'll be proud to present to you. One of them is Dr. Audley Bettin, OD, MCCFP, for services rendered to patients in Jamaica in the practice of family medicine. Dr. Audley Bettin has personified what a family physician should stand for with his integrity and 24 hours round-the-clock commitment to his patients. A man of character, charm, and wit, he has stood out as an exemplary human being within the community and within the community, his community and the community of family doctors. In acknowledgement,
yes, sir.
That's just the joy. In acknowledgement of his contribution to the medical fraternity, the public at large, and his continuing persistence geared towards the constant acquisition of knowledge through continuing medical education over several decades, the college is proud to welcome Dr. Audley Bettin into the registry of the specialist family physicians. We honor him as a gold standard physician. And this is given today, the 12th day of December 2021, by the college. And Dr. Benton will say, congratulations, congratulations, congratulations. Our next candidate is Dr. Hugh Mears Ingram, MCCFP, for services rendered to patients in Jamaica in the practice of family medicine. Dr. Hugh Mears Ingram has personified what a family physician should stand for, with his integrity and 24 hours round-the-clock commitment to his patients. He has consistently displayed a persevering and persistent commitment to continuing medical education over several decades. A man of character, humor, patience, and entrepreneurship in medical practice, he has stood out as an exemplary human being within his community and within the community of family doctors. In acknowledgement of his contribution to the medical fraternity and the public at large, the college is proud to welcome Dr. Hugh Mears Ingram into the registry of specialist family physicians and honor him as a gold standard family doctor. Given this day by the college, the 12th day of December 2021. And Dr. Ingram, we say warm congratulations. We are proud of you and we love you and love both of you very much. Congratulations once again. Thank you.
Congratulations then, Dr. Odibeton and Dr. Hugh Mears Ingram on being gold standard family physicians. I just want to do that clap. We are so proud of you. You are men who we know and we have respected for forever. At this point in time, we're going to move on from this special golden moment and allow our sponsors who are providing and allowing us to have this meeting today to come on board. We're going to ask H2000 Canada, please to go ahead and share with us your product line.
Are you feeling tired and weak? Not eating properly? Recovering from an illness? Take Vitamax, the complete sugar-free multivitamin mineral syrup with over 15 essential vitamins and minerals the body requires daily. Take Vitamax to boost your immune system, enhance your appetite, and boost performance with added antioxidant support. Kids love the taste, adults love the benefits. Vitamax, for overall good health in one spoonful. Vitamax, the complete supplement for the whole family.
Borototal Neem Cream, an Ayurvedic antiseptic cream that heals, soothes, moisturizes, making it the perfect companion, the power-packed herbal alternative for wound healing and skin infections. The ingredients in Borototal are neem, aloe vera, sesame seed oil, asoka or ashaka, licorice, and zinc. Borototal is effective and useful when treating nappy rash, dry cracked nipples, blisters and burns, acne, insect bites, and much more. Stay flawless without bleaching with H2K Naturella. H2K Emerge Pill, levonorgestrel 0.75 mg. When you have failed birth control or unprotected sex, speak to your pharmacist within 72 hours and Emerge the morning after pill. Those were some of our over-the-counter products. Now for a reminder of some of our prescription medication. H2K azithromycin 500 mg. Azithromycin is used to treat chest infections such as pneumonia, infections of the nose and throat such as sinus infections, skin infections, Lyme disease, and some sexually transmitted infections. Azithromycin, the 3-day success. Did you know we also offer SCASI 200 oral azithromycin suspension? It has a menthol minty flavor enhancing compliance in children and the elderly. H2K co-amoxiclav 625 mg and 1000 mg. Co-amoxiclav is given to treat bacterial infections. It is prescribed for sinus infections, urinary tract infections, chlamydia, syphilis, skin infections, joint infections, and some dental infections. It is also given before some surgical operations to prevent an infection from developing. H2K co-amoxiclav stop bacterial infections right in its tracks. H2K fluconazole 150 mg. The single dose success in vaginal candidiasis, acute, recurrent, and prophylaxis to reduce the incidence of recurrent vaginal candidiasis. Also used to treat Candida balanitis. H2K Protride 5, finasteride 5 mg for the treatment of symptomatic benign prostatic hyperplasia and also male pattern baldness. H2K Tamsulosin hydrochloride modified release 400 microgram, the prostate selective alpha blocker to relieve BPH quickly, safely, and with exceptional tolerability in long-term therapy. H2K acyclovir 5% cream, fast-acting antiviral medication for cold sores. H2K ibuprofen 400 mg and 600 mg reduces swelling, relieves pain in dysmenorrhea and pelvic inflammation. When ED tears you down, get back up with Tadalafil 20 mg for the treatment of erectile dysfunction and symptoms of an enlarged prostate. Tada lasts for 36 hours, so versatile when you need it most. Go from 0 to 100 with Migra 100 Sildenafil 100 mg tablets for the treatment of erectile dysfunction and pulmonary arterial hypertension. Migra takes effect 30 to 60 minutes before sex and lasts for 24 hours. Thank you for listening to some of what we offer at Health 2000 Canada, otherwise known as H2K. We proudly serve the Caribbean since 1999. Doctors, please support us by writing H2K before the drug name on your prescriptions. All our products are available in pharmacies island-wide. Please ask for them. On behalf of Team H2K, we wish for you all a safe holiday season filled with laughter and love. Be kind to one another, and we hope to serve you again in 2022. Thank you.
And we thank H2K Canada for their support us all the time. And we thank you very much and wish you also Merry Christmas. At this time, we'd like to ask Indus Pharma to come and share their products with us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Anna Brown Morgan, and on behalf of Indus Life Sciences, sincere thanks to CCFP for allowing us to sponsor today's webinar of men and women health. So I'm going to share my screen.
Go ahead, Mr. Daya.
Thank you, sir.
You went outer space with Michael Strahan.
Is okay?
Perfect.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks for all the participants and greetings to them. And also for the gold standard family doctor winners, for both of them on behalf of Indus Life Sciences. And we are based in 3 Cardiff Avenue, Kingston 11. Also, we are housed with R.A. Williams in Spanish Town. We are distributed by Massey Distribution and R.A. Williams in Spanish Town. Indus, actually the name stands for I and us. That's what it is basically. Indus, I and us together serve the community. That is Indus. So just a quick refresh of our brands. One of our big brand, that's our Dresvi. You all know it is very ideal for treating vaginitis, especially bacterial vaginosis, as well as candidal vaginitis, trichomonar vaginitis, and mixed infection. And we launched in 2015 in Jamaica, and this is the first brand of a combination of metronidazole, the antibacterial, with the mecanozole, which is ideal for yeast infection, in a gel formulation. And this is more offers more compliance being a gel, as because the onset of action of the gel is the fastest compared to that of tablet or pessaries. And also the complaints, other complaints is the course of treatment is not too long. It is only for 5 nights. And also Dresvi is the first brand has been introduced in the Caribbean market with 5 applicators. So the patient can use 1 applicator per night to, and there is no need to reuse the applicator again. So it offers hygiene. And globally is the most acclaimed brand. It's available more than 38 countries across the globe. And especially here in Caribbean, it's available in Jamaica, Cayman, Bahamas, and also recently we launched in Guyana as well as in Barbados. It is available. So that's our Dresvi. Thanks for your patronage, and please kindly consider is a first line vaginal insert in your treatment. And of course, we have a nice drug for pain management, and especially those who suffer from knee pain, wrist pain, shoulder pain, neck pain, back pain, or arthritis pain. We have our Capsitop, as the brand name itself, gives idea how it is being coined. Capsaicin topical, that is Capsitop gel. It's a rub, and it offers the SWAT specialist, which is capsaicin, which is extract of capsicum, the pepper that we eat, and it is known to deplete pain by inhibiting the mediator substance P. It also offers diclofenac, which also known to deplete pain by inhibiting prostaglandin, and methyl salicylate is the third active ingredient in Capsitop. It depletes pain by inhibiting the other mediators like interleukins. And the levomenthol is basically a soothing agent. Also, it helps to penetrate these active drugs, the capsaicin, diclofenac, methyl salicylate, deep into tissues and muscles. Here, a little caution is that no need to rub aggressively or massage, because some patients may even complain it's burning. Some may appreciate it, saying it is working. But just as a general caution, a little spread or gentle spread is sufficient for Capsitop 2 to 3 times a day. And obviously, after applying, you have to wash the hands thoroughly and to keep this tube or Capsitop out of reach of kids. And in January 2022, we'll be launching the spray, which will be as Red Heat spray. We little bit changed the name to Red Heat because we removed capsaicin out of the spray. Otherwise, if capsaicin is there, it is more than a pain spray, it become a pepper spray. So we are launching it Red Heat spray, but indication is the same: back pain, shoulder pain, knee pain, arthritis pain, all those pain. Red Heat will be here soon. We'll be sampling it starting from next month, which is the new year 2022. And neuropathic pain, we have the Neurobalin, 75 and 150 milligram. And our major strength is the cost. Before we launched Neurobalin, the drug was good, but was very expensive. And we broke the barrier of pricing and made it more affordable, as a month supply of 75 milligram will cost just 2,850 compared to the brand. I'm not bashing it. The brand is good, but the cost is very expensive. And 150 milligram, ours is 3,250 for a month supply, which is 30 pills. And the brand is almost $11,000. And good news is that Neurobalin is subsidized well by the NHF. The patient has NHF card, and if your prescription is for diabetic neuropathic pain or even for epilepsy for that matter, NHF subsidizes this drug, pregabalin. And if it is Neurobalin, the patient literally pay nothing. They pay a small amount, which is close to nothing. As you could see here in this, on the right hand side, you could see the patient has filled in 30 pills of Neurobalin 75. The actual price for a month is 2,861, and the subsidy is 2,615.70. So you could understand how good is the price of Neurobalin, how much NSF subsidizes it. So you can bring back the smile in your patient face by prescribing Neurobalin, which is neuropathic pain, pregabalin, Neurobalin. And the last brand is more important is our Amino Pep, which we call as a big juice also, more ideal for this pandemic time as it offers zinc of 50 milligram plus all vitamins as well as amino acids, which is basically the building block of protein. As you could see, arginine, histidine, leucine, lysine, all are there, plus all vitamins, B1, B2, B6, B12, folic acid, calcium, vitamin A, zinc is also there. And especially this time of, this unending pandemic that is keep on, mutating. So as a medical practitioner, as a frontline warrior, you also need more protection to protect the community. So Amino Pep could be one of your right partner to improve your immunity as because it offers 50 milligrams of zinc. And Amino Pep is ideal for growing phase, especially with kids. Now the back to school is there. So for children, it's very ideal. So because they cannot follow the protocol much like us. So for them, a supplement which has zinc can help them. And we have a lot of topic today about men and women health and as well as exercise. So Amino Pep is ideal for them also, as the brand said, amino acids like valine, leucine, isoleucine, which is found to be ideal for those who do exercise. And elderly people, we can't miss them because for them it strengthens the muscles, which we know condition called as sarcopenia, which normally soften the muscles. And the Amino Pep will be ideal as because it has the amino acids like leucine, which strengthen the muscles and improves their walking performance, exercise performance, Amino Pep. And the dose is normally 10 ml once or twice daily for adults, and kids is normally 5 ml once or twice daily for kids. And for those who are underwent surgery or chemotherapy or those C13 patients, nothing wrong in stepping up the dose up to 15 ml. It's sweet, but no natural sugar on it. So it can be safely given for diabetes patient. It's a chocolate caramel flavor, so that will love by kids also. So with this, I'm going to finish just to refresh one of our ophthalmic brand we just launched a couple of months before. This is over-the-counter brand. One is for cellulose, that is for dry eyes, as because we spend a lot of time on webinars, Zoom meetings, as well as gadgets. So if any of your patient has dry eyes, even personally, if you have dry eyes, itchy eyes, we can consider this drops, which is a lubricant 1%, and cellulose 0.5 is also available. Both of them are over the counter. So the patient can just get it from the pharmacist, we just write it a piece of paper. They cost around $450 to $500 per unit, per pack. And for infected eyes, we have our ciprofloxacin, eye and ear drops, Ciprodes, and tobramycin. And for infected conditions, we can use the antibiotic tobramycin drops are available. And with the immunosuppressant, dexamethasone, Tobrades D is also available. So this, of course, these three are prescription products. Definitely, it demands prescription to fill it in the pharmacies. So this is our ophthalmic range. So if you have any scope in your practice, kindly consider price-wise, they are unbeatably affordable. Just to give an idea of Tobrades D, it's around 680, and the nearest brand is almost 5 times expensive. It's as expensive as $2,800, whereas Tobrades D is just $680 to the patients, which is tobramycin with dexamethasone. So rest other brands are way affordable. Tobrades as well as Ciprodes are way affordable to any of the nearest other brand. Thank you very much once again for CCFP for allowing Indus to be on board. Thank you, Dr. Morgan. Stay safe. Have a nice day, and wish you all happy Christmas and advance Happy New Year to you all. Thank you.
Mr. Dale, as usual, thank you so very much. Your products speak for themselves. And of course, we thank you very much for your support, as we thank also H2K. You are, the two of you are such solid supporters of the CCFP. It is fitting that you are here for this, our closing session of the year, and also when we have honored our family physicians. So we thank both of you. And it is just left to me now to say It's been good being with you guys, and I'm going to hand over right now to our second moderator for the evening. She will take you through the evening, afternoon into the evening, with great aplomb as usual. So Dr. Pauline Williams-Green, could you please come on board, take over, salam.
Thank you so much, Dr. Anna Brown Morgan, and who has ably guided our flight onto this point. So we're going to make a slight change as I take over. Not as your pilot, but more as your purser on this flight. So I'm your flight attendant. So welcome all, and hope you use the opportunity to stretch, because we're going to go right into our third sponsor, and that is Abbott Nutritionals. Do we have our sponsor's presentation from Abbott Nutritionals?
Life doesn't stop for diabetes. Be ready for every moment with Glucerna. It's the #1 doctor-recommended brand that's scientifically designed to help manage your blood sugar. Live every moment. Glucerna.
As a clinician, helping your patients make the right decisions is a daily task. Glucerna shakes provide nutrients to help your patients support their immune health. Replacing a usual breakfast and a snack with Glucerna Hunger Smart resulted in a 50% reduction in the positive blood glucose area under the curve after breakfast. Glucerna contains Carb Steady, which is a scientifically designed blend of slow-release carbohydrates which allow your patients to maintain more consistent, balanced blood sugar throughout the day. Because many of your patients make poor choices or they may miss breakfast and lunch altogether, Glucerna provides a better meal choice with more protein, key vitamins and minerals to support the immune system of your patients. Glucerna is available in all major supermarkets and pharmacies and is distributed by Callender.
Take a powerful step in building new tissue with Juven. Juven is a refreshing therapeutic nutrition drink that has been clinically shown to support wound healing in as little as 2 weeks. Taking just 2 packets of Juven per day has been clinically shown to help your body repair after injury, surgery, and wounds. Juven is formulated with powerful ingredients: arginine, glutamine, beta-hydroxy-beta-methylbutyrate, HMB, collagen protein, and micronutrients. These ingredients work together to support building tissue. Arginine is an amino acid that helps promote blood flow in the body. Increased blood flow improves delivery of oxygen and nutrients, both vital for wound healing. Arginine also promotes building of proteins that can contribute new tissue to support healing. Glutamine, also an amino acid, plays a role in collagen production and supports the immune system. HMB helps protect proteins from breaking down in your body, which helps new tissue to build up. Collagen is a protein found naturally in bones, connective tissue, and skin. Ingestion of hydrolyzed collagen affects the skin and stimulates internal collagen production. Hydrolyzed collagen has been shown to increase the rate of wound healing. Antioxidants, vitamin C and E, vitamin B12, and zinc are micronutrients which have been shown to be important in the wound healing process. Taking just 2 packets of Juven per day has been clinically shown to support wound healing in as little as 2 weeks. For more information on nutrition and wound healing and Juven, visit juven.com today.
Thank you so much from Abbott, and I call him the Glucerna man. Thank you so much for your support from Abbott Nutritional. So we got that information as our plane took off again, and we're now going to enter the first stage of our flight. And we're welcoming Dr. Jordan B. Eaton. He is a graduate of the medical school at the University of the West Indies. And after internship, he later went on to do further medical work at the Kingston Public Hospital, where he developed a love in working with patients with multiple mental health problems while he was on the open general medical ward. At this time, he also became involved with CARIMENSA, which is the Caribbean Institute of Mental Health and Substance Abuse, and he developed his passion here. He decided to enroll in the psychiatry program at the University of the West Indies, and he's now a senior resident. And as well, he works with Pure Jamaica Healthcare with an emphasis on the treatment of conditions with medical marijuana. And this brings us to the next stage of our flight. He will be presenting the use of cannabis in the management of chronic pain. Dr. Eaton, over to you.
Hi, afternoon. Thank you so much, Dr. Green. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen. Can let me know if we're seeing it?
Yep.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so let's start the slideshow. Come along. Oh, there we go. All right, so good afternoon, everybody, again. So as you heard, I'll be presenting today on the use of cannabis in the treatment of chronic pain management. I'd like to start just by sharing a little blurb that I found. Chronic pain is not all about the body, and it's not all about the brain. It's everything. Target everything and take back your life. And that was from Dr. Sean Mackey. He's an MD and a PhD out of the States, and he specializes in anesthesiology and pain management. So I feel it's a very appropriate note for us to start on, since we're going to be talking about chronic pain. So general outline of what we're going to cover: the history of cannabis, the neuropharmacology of cannabis, chronic pain itself, and then the applications. So diving right into the meat of the matter, cannabis, it refers to a genus of flowering plants from the family Cannabiceae, and it includes indica and sativa species. It arises from Central Asia and Indian subcontinents and dates back as far as 3,500 BC. And there are over 483 known active components or compounds that you can find in cannabis. The main ones that we speak about, however, are THC, CBD, and CBN. And that's going to be the focus of what we're trying to discuss today. So as far back as 2700 BC and 1000 BC, it was used as a medicine in China and in India. If you go through the history of cannabis, you will see that it also made reference during the Greco-Roman period, etc. It was brought to European medicine in the early and middle 19th century, and it progressed to the US in the late 19th and early 20th century. And it existed even before as a use in religious ceremonies and for hemp fibers. So we say all of that to say, how many people actively use cannabis? Currently, it's estimated that there are about 200 million cannabis users worldwide. And surprisingly, the highest number are found in Asia, followed by the Americas, and then in Africa. To bring it a little bit more close to home, the Jamaica Healthy Lifestyle Survey number 3 that was done, I think, in 2017, noted that 17% of Jamaicans reported cannabis use, and the highest prevalence age band was in the 15 to 24 range, and it was about 21%, which is concerning. And we'll get into that later on. It is the most common illicit drug used worldwide, and it produces physical and mental effects that can change a user's perception, heighten mood, and increase in appetite. It can also induce anxiety and paranoia. Now, in terms of the neuropharmacology of it, when you're considering cannabis and cannabinoids and how the entire endocannabinoid system works, there are really 3 broad categories that you have to consider, and it's based on their source. So first, you consider phytocannabinoids, and those are the ones that we're most commonly familiar with. These are the ones found in plants. And again, you can find phytocannabinoids in plants that are not exactly cannabis, indica, cannabis, sativa, or hybrids of those. There's also the endocannabinoid system, which is an intrinsic system that is built into humans and animals. And there are synthetic cannabinoids that exist that have been made based on either phytocannabinoids or the endocannabinoids. Now, when we speak about phytocannabinoids, as we had referenced earlier, over 480 compounds, what we're really referring to is THC, CBD, and CBN. Now, if there's anything you're going to take away from this presentation in terms of the neuropharmacology of cannabis and the treatment of pain and chronic pain, it is this. The mechanisms of the analgesic effect of cannabinoids include inhibition of the release of neurotransmitters and neuropeptides from the presynaptic nerve endings, modulation of the postsynaptic neuron excitability, activation of descending inhibitory pathways, and reduction of neural inflammation. So there are about 4 different mechanisms that we're looking at. The presynaptic, the postsynaptic, modulating the actual excitability, the descending pain pathways, and reduction of inflammation. Now, the pharmacology, that if anybody was like me, not your best part in med school, but we have to do it. So cannabinoids act via 2 different receptors. Cannabinoid 1, which is called a CB1, which is predominantly expressed on the neurons, and cannabinoid 2, otherwise called CB2, which predominantly expresses on cells of the immune system as well as glial and neural cells in the brain. Sticking a pin, yes, they both are expressed on the neurons, but CB2, you find it more in peripheral areas. You do have a small amount in the nervous system, but it is mainly in the immune system that you see it. So CB1 receptors are seen on the presynaptic areas and are seen on inhibitory neurons. And the studies suggest that the psychotropic effects are actually mediated by CB1. And when we're speaking about psychotropic effects here, we're talking about hallucinations, paranoia, disorganized thought, behavior, etc. Also, you can speak about anxiety effects, the time dilatation, the slowing of the motor impulses, etc. Overall effects are mediated by multiple biochemical pathways. And I would go into this, but that's a whole lecture on itself, and I am not qualified to give it because I'm not a biochemist. But this is what it all boils down to. The substance and the receptor. As you can see, THC, CBD, and CBN all act on CB1 and CB2 receptors, but they act in different ways and to different extents. So THC is a CB1 and a CB2 agonist. CBD is a CB1 and CB2 antagonist. And CBN has a greater affinity for CB2 over CB1, and it acts as an antagonist. And all of that is going to come into reference later on. So before we can speak about the applications of cannabis in chronic pain, we have to understand what exactly is chronic pain. So WHO, if I'm remembering correctly, describes or defines chronic pain as long-standing pain that persists beyond the usual recovery period or occurs along with a chronic health condition. And some of the sources of chronic pain that they listed, and it's not limited to this, is arthritis, sciatica, diabetic neuropathy, cancer, multiple sclerosis, slip disc, trigeminal neuralgia, for example, and the list goes on. It may be on and off or continuous, and it may affect people to the point where they cannot work, eat properly, take part in physical activity, or enjoy life. And unfortunately, the mainstay of treatment usually revolves around opioids. And I'm going to stick a pin because I'm sure someone out there is asking, why is it that a psychiatrist is speaking about pain management? Shouldn't it be a pain management specialist? Yes and no. The two fields actually overlap. So we speak specifically about the terrible triad. And this is something that's not very well spoken about in terms of pain management. Pain may cause a preoccupation with the pain, with depression and irritability. Depression and irritability often leads to insomnia and weariness, leading to more irritability, depression, and pain. And this is what we call the terrible triad of suffering, sleeplessness, and sadness. And the urge to stop the pain can make people drug dependent and may drive others to repeat surgeries or result to questionable treatment. And while we may not be so greatly affected by it here, if you look at data coming out of the United States, for example, they are really focused right now on the opioid epidemic and the number of lives that have been lost and the number of lives that have been ruined as a result of opioid dependency, or what we call in psychiatry an opioid use disorder. Right? So there is a distinct overlap between managing your pain, appropriate medication for the pain, but trying to find the safest possible dose to, one, prevent the person from developing psychiatric complications, such as depression, anxiety, PTSD from their pain, or developing a dependence on these opioid painkillers, and that can have more complicated sequelae. So jumping into the applications, we're going to approach this in two phases. We're going to speak about the animal studies, and we're going to speak about actual human data sets. So when you look at the animal studies, CB1 and CB2 receptors upregulated in the neuropathic pain process. CB1 and CB2 receptors are involved in inflammatory pain processes, and cannabinoids have been found effective in increasing the threshold at which pain is perceived in tumor-afflicted mice. So we are looking at three major processes for pain that cannabinoids have a role in. In both cases, the use of THC, CBD, and CBN containing compounds decreased pain responses by down modulation of the respective pathways. But that's in animals. When we look at humans, most studies evaluate the synergism between opioids and cannabinoids. And one of the criticisms of this data is that it has usually been in healthy subjects. So there is a gap in the literature. Studies need to be done to look at specific disease models. Not saying that some have not been done, which I will get to later on, but there is a paucity of data in the literature. When we look at opioids and cannabinoids, they both provide antinociception through G protein coupled mechanisms. And many studies have explored a synergistic interaction between them. So the adjunct use of cannabinoids may permit the use of lower doses of opioids than otherwise required, thus acting as an opioid-sparing agent in similar situations. Similar to giving a steroid-sparing agent for a patient, for example, with lupus or myasthenia gravis or neuromyelitis optica spectrum disorder. The rationale behind it, if you are able to maintain a patient effectively with pain control, with, for example, morphine 10 milligrams 3 times a day, and you're worried about the risk of dependence, the theory behind it is that by introducing cannabinoids, you can actually maintain the patient's pain control while decreasing the amount of opioid analgesics used. So instead of using 30 milligrams for the day, you may go down to 15 or 10. However, in other conditions, the addition of cannabinoids may offer no additional benefits. So the optimal therapy for pain management is in specific condition remains subject for future research. This is what the data shows us now. Cannabis can be helpful in relieving neuropathic pain, with the magnitude of analgesia generally contingent on the amount of THC. The effects on reduction of neoplastic-induced pain and neuropathic pain has been called into question based on the lack of recent studies And again, the poor sample sizing in the past. So you're looking at studies that involve maybe 20 to 30 participants that ran for about a 6-week period. It did show promising result, but when considering that in terms of sample of study power, it makes one question, is this really something that we should be giving to everybody? It leads back to suggestions for adjunctive treatment with opioids. And again, we've come back to this summary slide. Again, if this is the only thing you're going to take away, let's go again. The mechanisms of the analgesic effect of cannabinoids include the inhibition of the release of neurotransmitters and neuropeptides from the presynaptic nerve endings, modulation of the postsynaptic neuron excitability, and activation of descending inhibitory pathways, and the reduction of neural inflammation. That is what everything boils down to when we consider cannabis. Now, here is the gray area. Which is better and how do we apply this? Because it is wonderful to know this in theory, but theory is not going to help when you have a patient who has, for example, my mother had trigeminal neuralgia, which is debilitating chronic pain. If you have a patient who is being treated for late stage cancer, or if you have a patient who has chronic bony pains as a result of sickle cell disease, we see these patients on a regular basis. So how does this theory apply to practice of what we do? So we have to look at the meta-analyses, and when you look at them, there has been an analysis of medical cannabis in chronic pain, and it actually does suggest a moderate amount of evidence that cannabis or cannabinoids exhibit analgesic activity, especially in neuropathic pain. The limitations of these studies, as we had said before, short treatment duration, small number of patients, heterogeneous patient population, examination of different cannabinoids, different doses, different endpoints, and as well as some amount of modest observable effects, right? Current guidelines. So surprisingly, the European Federation of Neurological, okay, this is blocking it, right? They recommended cannabinoids, a combination of THC and cannabidiol, which is CBD, as a second or third line treatment for the treatment of central pain seen in multiple sclerosis, and that was in 2010 from Attal et al. The Canadian Pain Society supported their use as a third line option for the treatment of neuropathic pain after anticonvulsives, antidepressants, and opioids, and that was in 2014. Health Canada provided preliminary guidelines for prescribing smoked cannabis in the treatment of chronic non-cancer pain. That was Katan et al. And that one in of itself is controversial because within the current guidelines, there is some amount of disagreement in terms of route of use, appropriateness of use, etc. But this is what it boils down to. Generally speaking, the medical fraternity internationally recommends that if a patient is going to be treated with cannabis-based products, these are the guidelines. 1, it should not be smoked. We don't want people just regularly lighting up a spliff or a joint or smoking a bowl. We don't want people doing edibles, right? What we recommend is oils, tinctures, and vaping. And there is method behind this. So for example, with smoking of cannabis directly, you are introducing the potential for carcinogenic agents. With edibles specifically, the problem is in terms of dose regulation. So everybody can go and get gummies or a brownie, but how are you going to know that this batch of brownies is going to contain this amount of THC and this amount of CBD or CBN every single time? And then even within that, how much are you going to need to effect pain control before you overload the body on the amount of medication that you actually need? The other guideline is that any cannabis containing compound must not contain more than 10% THC. If you want to go to 100% CBD, that's fantastic, that's fine. But THC is implicated in the psychiatric complications that we see. And what the data has shown us is that anything over 10% THC raises the risk of the patient developing psychiatric comorbid conditions. And we're talking anything from a brief psychotic disorder to bipolar disorder to frank depression or even frank schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder. And that's just a whole nother level of confusion that we do not need, because sometimes these patients can be very difficult to treat. Continuing along, at the same time, Special Interest Group on Neuropathic Pain and International Association for the Study of Pain provided, quote, a weak recommendation against the use of cannabinoids in neuropathic pain, mainly because of the negative results, potential for misuse, abuse, diversion, and long-term mental health risks, particularly in the susceptible. And I like that they put particularly in the susceptible here, because there are two major categories of persons that we consider susceptible for mental health risks. One, persons who have a pre-existing family history. So if there is any suggestion of a bipolar disorder, a psychotic disorder, anything like that within a patient's family history, it raises the likelihood that they are not a candidate for cannabis treatment. And the other category that we speak about references back to the Jamaica Healthier Lifestyle Survey. The highest usage was between the 15 and 24 age band. And what we know is that multiple areas in the developing brain do not reach full development until 23, 25 years old, specifically that area at the front that we call the prefrontal cortex, your seat of good manners and your seat of executive judgment. When you are exposing the developing brain to these potential insults, you affect how the brain develops. And you can, one, precipitate them developing mental illness, or two, inhibit neural growth and you restrict their potential for neural development. So someone who could, for example, have been IQ of 160, 180, because of the introduction of cannabis, specifically THC at an early point, it damages the potential. And you're looking at someone of average intelligence or possibly below average intelligence. We have no way of knowing what the effects are going to be. And as a result, we are very hesitant to prescribe medical cannabis to those who are young. Current guidelines state, I believe, below the age of 18, not a candidate. My personal guideline, anybody who is below the age of 25 is not a candidate for medical cannabis, unless it is, for example, rare seizure disorders like Lennox-Gastaut syndrome that has shown significant response to THC and CBD treatment. The National Academy of Sciences, Engineering and Medicine in 2017 have evaluated more than 10,000 scientific abstracts, and they established that there is, quote, conclusive or substantial evidence for the use of cannabis treatment in treating chronic pain in adults, and again, adults. Also, they noted moderate evidence that cannabinoids, and this is a synthetic cannabinoid, nabiximols, are effective in improving short-term sleep outcomes in patients with chronic pain. When we look at chronic non-cancer pain, again, systematic reviews, meta-analyses, my bread and butter, love them.
The back has a similar shape. What is this support behind?
The systematic reviews of cannabis and cannabinoid use in chronic non-cancer pain, i.e. neuropathic pain, fibromyalgia, involving 18 randomized controlled trials between 2003 and 2014. All 29 trials included 2,000 participants, and their duration was up to several weeks. 22 of 29 trials demonstrated a significant analgesic effect, and several also reported improvements in secondary outcomes, sleep, for example, spasticity, and mood. Small studies have also been done, specifically looking at sickle cell disease, which showed mild to moderate pain reduction in patients. And that, I think, is very interesting, especially for our Afro-Caribbean population, which has one of the best sickle cell care units in the world. Is this something that we should be looking into the future? When looking at neuropathic pain, again, meta-analyses, 178 participants presents evidence that inhaled cannabis may provide short-term reductions, approximately 30%, and in chronic neuropathic pain for one in 5 to 6 patients. So is it going to make a difference? Some would argue yes, some would argue no. There are challenges, as with everything. We've spoken about the effects of high doses of THC, the addictive potential, and the dependence. Granted, in the grand spectrum of substance uses, the risk of harm associated with cannabis-based products is generally seen as lower when compared to things like alcohol, tobacco, opioids, but it still does exist. There are also regulatory issues with drug scheduling of cannabis. Cannabis in Jamaica specifically exists in a very strange gray area because, yes, we have decriminalized it and it is approved for medical use, but when you've looked at, or if you've ever gone to one of these medical cannabis dispensaries, they're using high containing THC compound, 50%, 60%, and very low levels of CBD. The lowest level of THC I recall seeing at one establishment was, I think, 27%, which is more than 2 times the recommended limit. Long-term studies with larger population sizes are needed. And again, this is factoring back into issues related to drug scheduling because it is very difficult to get approval to do a trial with cannabis when it is scheduled as it is in a lot of the countries that it is. You have ethical approval issues and legal issues, so it's very complicated. And of course, as I alluded to, the psychiatric complications of cannabis, specifically THC use, psychotic type symptoms, depressive type symptoms, bipolar type symptoms, you can run the gamut. So to wrap everything up, is there evidence for cannabis in the use of chronic pain? Yes, there is. We know it has effects on neuropathic pain, neoplastic related pains, and we know it has inflammatory related pains. Is the evidence robust? Not 100%. However, based on that one, not 100%, some countries and some organizations have actually made the recommendation already. So, are there potential complications from unregulated or unmonitored use? Absolutely. This is why if we're entertaining medical cannabis, it needs to be treated like any other prescription medication. Dose, frequency, strength, duration, and adjustment as needed. We're not sending someone, oh, you have chronic pain from arthritis. Go and buy this weed and make a couple joints and smoke. That's not the purpose. We need to control the constituents that we're using. What is the percentage of THC? What is the percentage of CBD? What is the percentage of CBN? Are we going to adjust? Are we using from a reputable source that is maintaining consistency between sampling? Are these institutions that are providing it being regulated and monitored from a legal perspective as well as from a medical perspective? So, in conclusion, what is the answer? The answer is, welcome to the forefront of medicine. There is no clear answer. Is there evidence to support it? Absolutely. Is it something that I do? Yes, but there is a caveat. Patients are selected carefully. The risks and the benefits must be weighed. There is no blanket, one size fits all for any patient. You have to sit down with your patient, hear their concerns, and address their concerns. It may be that they are concerned because of dependence to opioids. So you may want to introduce cannabis to reduce the opioid load. Or they may be terrified of opioids because they have seen what it has done overseas and they want to try something different. Maybe it's a patient who has anxiety and doesn't want to take Xanax and would prefer 2 puffs of a CBD vape. These are the considerations. We have to sit down and talk to our patients and put their specific case in the wider context of the data and individualize a treatment plan. Thank you all so much for your kind attention and have a great Sunday.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Thank you so very much, Dr. Eaton. That certainly got our chat going, and it was certainly stimulating. So we look forward to your questions later. Please put them in the question and answer. And we move right along in our flight as we go to our next presenter, and that's Dr. Winston Della Haye. And there's so much here. Dr. Della Haye is senior lecturer in psychiatry at the Department of Community Health and Psychiatry at the University of the West Indies. And he is highly recommended for the topic. He is former deputy dean, a consultant, addiction and general psychiatrist. We know him as a former CMO, Chief Medical Officer, and we also know him as certified addiction professional and a global master trainer in the treatment of substance use disorders. And of course, he also has an interest in alternatives to incarceration and violence prevention. But we're really looking forward to this talk on the ethics of cannabis, and of course, with a focus on men and women in health. Dr. Winston Della Haye. And Winston, I won't tell them you were once my intern.
Been a while. Yeah, thank you so much, Pauline. Really want to thank the organizers for inviting me and Jordan. Jordan is our rising star. New 4th year resident in psychiatry. I think he could take the exams tomorrow and pass. So it's really nice to see, persons you're training coming up nicely. Excellent presentation from Jordan. So I'll just finish up on the back end of that with the ethics of cannabis. A really very interesting topic and area. I think Jordan did it justice as he usually does. So just to continue then, we're certainly not discussing this bud that people crush up, the usual in their palms, etc. for most of the day, especially on a construction site. But this is really where we're taking the whole thing. We need to respect the leaf and look at extracts, significant extracts. I have no interest in prana products. It's the only pictures I had, just for clarity. So different chemicals Jordan went through: cannabinoids, terpenes, terpenoids, flavonoids. Just a little background. By definition, medicinal cannabis or medical marijuana refers to the use of cannabis, including its constituents, the constituents of hemp, or cannabis, THC, and other cannabinoids. Overall, generally, prescribed and recommended by A, and highlighted in red. There's a reason for that. This is not intuitive. This is not an antihypertensive that we've been trained to administer. And so a new product comes on the market. We may get some or may not, some specific training, we can read it and apply it. Not the cannabis products, I assure you. Need to be a trained physician. And of course, for a well-known medical condition. A little history, Jordan went into this, so I'll just skip through. It's been many years. And there you can see 2735 BC, first documented medical use of cannabis. And there are others, 1400 BC, the Atharva Veda, the Indians, certainly the Romans as well, who use marijuana medically as a drug to treat pain specifically and flatulence. And then, of course, just to give you some more examples, potential as an anesthetic, documented in China in 200 AD. Dagga, a product used by African tribes to treat many things, and they continue to use them. In 4 BC, there was evidence in Jerusalem of marijuana used to offset the pain of childbirth. And still today, for many years now, Cambodian and Vietnamese women use cannabis as a remedy for postpartum distress. The gravamen of the presentation in terms of the ethical areas would be the 4 basic principles of biomedical ethics, namely respect for autonomy, non-maleficence, beneficence, and justice. So just to tease those out a little, autonomy, it's the foundation of the informed consent. And I really urge you, if you're using a product like cannabis extracts or other formulations, which I'll just give a mention of in my second to last presentation, must have informed consent, because as Jordan indicated, rightly so, there is still need for significant studies, appropriate studies, randomized control, double-blind, randomized control trials in the area of cannabis. So informed consent is critical. Patients should be given all the information about their condition and options for treatment. When I assess a patient, I do a whole session just on treatment, so that there's clarity. Decisions should be made without coercion, persuasion, or manipulation, given all the facts, the subject. I hate that term, but you see it a lot in the literature. I use patient because that works best for me. The patient makes an informed decision as to whether or not to participate. Non-maleficence would be the moral codes based on the Hippocratic Oath we all took: bring benefit, do no harm. The physician's duty to prevent harming the patient. And highlighted in red is the fact that allowing patients to suffer needlessly with their symptoms while there exists an effective therapy, in this case, medicinal cannabis, certainly constitutes harm. So, we're looking at it from both ends. Beneficence, do all the good you can. Patients must be informed of all the risks and benefits, so you have to know them. Again, it's not intuitive, it's not a hypoglycemic as you use in diabetes or an antihypertensive. You have to learn it, study it. This information is critical in their provision of consent. Risks should be reduced to only those absolutely necessary. So if you don't know the products, don't write them. Justice, not the block road justice that we've become accustomed to in Jamaica, but concern with fairness and equality in the distribution of health resources. Harsh reality is, in Jamaica, medicinal cannabis is legal based on the amendments to the Dangerous Drugs Act some years ago. Doesn't mean all is well, and I'll highlight some of those as I go through. It's not without concerns, even then back in 1000 AD in the Arabic text, and I quote, on poisons, end of quote, warned against the use of hashish. They certainly saw that hashish could cause a human to become mute and blind and could lead to retching and death. Ancient Romans used marijuana medicine as a painkilling analgesic, yet warned that misuse or abuse of the herb would lead to possible impotence. There was a splinter group of Muslims. I'm just touching on a couple of things. Ismaili Muslims, the order of assassins who used hashish prior to committing acts of terror on the political opponents of their leader, well-known Hassan as-Sabah, and he lived 1050 to 1124. The point is, there are negatives, we're aware of them, and we certainly want to highlight those. When you look at this burden of diseases, just to put really the significance on the burden as it relates to drug use, WHO burden of disease reports, they speak of a disability-adjusted life year. You're all familiar with the definition of that. Neuropsychiatric conditions are responsible for a whole 1/4, a quarter of all disability-adjusted life years. 30% of those are attributed to non-communicable diseases. So it's a significant factor. The neuropsychiatric conditions most at the top, well known to you all, depression, about 12%, followed by the very thing we're discussing, substance misuse, and then schizophrenia, et cetera, et cetera. The point is, neuropsychiatric conditions contribute more than, and listen to this, either cardiovascular disease or cancer. So it's a major challenge, and we can't lose sight of the fact that in good, there's also bad, and that's the nature of the world. Must give this slide to Jordan. He made reference to it. He may have it, but you can use this, Jordan. What it speaks to is the power of ensuring the prefrontal cortex stays stable. It's the one last developed, and it's the one most easily affected. And it is why we really urge our youngsters, burn the weed before you are 21 if you must, for this very reason. And Jordan made reference to it. Neurological connections between neurons develop with age. They certainly come to the fore at about age 20. If through weed use you develop other connections and means of alleviating your need for immediate gratification, for example, you'll never learn them. And so therein lies a challenge, and we really need to have our youngsters stay drug-free, at least, and Jordan went very safe to say 25, generally between 21 and 25, and it's unlikely they'll become addicted to substances. The DSM-5, which is the 5th edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, speaks to these diagnostic categories. They are there because they exist, or they wouldn't be there. So the category under which I'm referring to these negatives would be substance-related and addictive disorders. Specific disorders include substance use disorders and substance-induced disorders, to include also gambling disorders. So there is clarity. The argument about can ganja make you mad? Well, there's a reason. There is a diagnosis in the DSM-5 called cannabis-induced psychotic disorder. We see it every day on Ward 21. And then, of course, Jordan made reference to cannabis-induced mood disorder. In other words, the works can be precipitated by cannabis use. Yes, provided you have the underlying genetic vulnerability. So we recognize that. The science of medical marijuana, just giving it a little touch as we go through 20th century, increasingly so, we see we're in the US, they were manufacturing drugs from marijuana. Squibb drug company of times gone by, named Chlorodyne, for example. There was Eli Lilly and Park Davis manufacturing products containing cannabis extracts. Here is a hurdle. Jordan made reference to it. Drug scheduling. There are 5 schedules. Cannabis happens to find itself in Schedule 1, meaning it has, strictly speaking, based on the scheduling and the definition, no medicinal value and is also addictive. The harsh reality is that increasingly so, we're seeing research coming out, and we need more, but it's very clear that there are positive benefits to using cannabis, and specifically non-smoked products. We must highlight that. I couldn't sit here as a physician like you and support smoking anything. Even if it would be wood chips or paper, smoking anything is hazardous to your health. We all know that. The WHO, they certainly are doing great work, and Jamaica had an opportunity to lead some of those discussions. And I'm sure they continue to. But at the time when I was CMO with Minister Tufton, we made representation. They have now reviewed. It's in the clear that CBD needs to come out of the Schedule 1. The Office of Narcotics Drugs Control, they are the ones determining scheduling. They have indicated such. It's been accepted by the WHO, but there's a process. So it takes about 2 years to get that done. But there is hope. CBD, I think, is going to come out, and then certain percentages of THC containing products. The 21st century development still, research on the benefits of cannabis continue. They now have specific indications, glaucoma, anorexia nervosa, PTSD, amongst others, seizures I must mention, and the very subject Jordan discussed, chronic pain. And we have done, are doing research in these areas at the University of the West Indies. Other studies look at cancer-fighting properties. So these are probably embryonic in terms of their development, but they are there, that's the point. Sativex, an oral mucosal spray, approved in June 2006 in Canada to treat neuropathic pain. Again, the point of Jordan's presentation is at this time as an adjunct to the treatment as usual. Very important point to be made. The vaporization of marijuana provides the same therapeutic benefits of smoked marijuana, and highlighted in red, this is really the crux of it, without the negative consequences of administering marijuana via smoking. We must recognize that. The American Medical Association supporting the need for more research to enable physicians to gain access to the potential medical benefits of cannabis. There's a position paper of the American College of Physicians, your equivalent in the US 2008, with greater research into its therapeutic benefits, we'll all be able to better analyze the benefits and harmful side effects. So let's not forget that. Our antipsychotics have side effects. We have newer ones with less side effects, but they're not without. Similarly, medicinal cannabis products do have harmful side effects, so we must be familiar with them. And there is a list. It's increasingly lengthy. Some of this really, you must view with some amount of caution because it is not a silver bullet. It is not for everyone. But if there is benefit, then patients should be exposed to that. The real ethical debate at this time isn't whether there is efficacy, increasing evidence to support that. The real ethical debate is mainly focused on the use of smoking medicinal cannabis. And as I pointed out, smoking anything is hazardous to your health. And in fact, if you think about it, there is absolutely no FDA-approved product which is smoked. Why then would we recommend 2 spliffs or 3 or 4? And so, we need to keep it real. The need for training, I must highlight as I wind down my presentation. It is not intuitive. You have to train. You have to subject yourself. I'll use that term. I'll tell you why. So I had a training program, still have it. I've been presenting it in a couple of other Caribbean islands. We initially had a good outing of physicians. I think the initial training was at the Pegasus. We had about 40 persons and dwindled. There's no way you're going to grasp prescribing cannabis without appropriate training. In other words, what I'm suggesting is it's a worthwhile investment for the patients and for us, without a doubt. And so as I close off, I'll just mention a new kid on the block, which would be magic mushroom extracts, specifically psilocybin. I have started treating patients. I look forward to doing a presentation for your group next on specifically PAP, psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. So I just want to thank you very much for the opportunity to present to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Haye. And you have certainly, I'm sure, generated quite a few questions. And so we will go straight into the question and answers at this point. Let's see what some of the questions. While I look at that, I think I saw one which asked the difference between vaping and, let me go in order. This is for Dr. Eaton. Do the concerns about use of cannabinoids in the young apply also to CBD? This is coming from Douglas Street.
Oh, thank you so much for that question, Mr. Street. Controversial question. The short answer is yes and no. So THC, we know, is implicated in neurodevelopmental problems, psychiatric problems, etc., etc. Does that mean CBD is without any risks? No. You can still have sequelae from CBD use. And as a result, the blanket statement is, if you're under 18, under 21, cannabis is not for you. You have time when you get older to do all these wonderful things when your brain is developed. Personally, I say 25 because I need as much of that prefrontal cortex just to make my life a little bit easier with patients with schizophrenia and chronic conditions. Blanket statement, under 25, for me, 21, 18, depending on the jurisdiction that you're in, just avoid it. THC or CBD, unless it is medically prescribed for a specific medical condition. So for example, there are persons who are 14, 16 who are on CBD containing compounds to treat intractable seizures. So there is a risk and a benefit that you have to analyze.
Okay. Another question is from Dimar. I assume the neurodevelopmental impact is in reference to those directly using cannabis. Anything to suggest a similar outcome for secondhand cannabis smokers? So it's a passive smokers, I assume they're interested in.
I am not familiar with any in the literature. We do know that you can, for example, get a secondhand high or a contact high from someone who is smoking around you, but it would, in my opinion, be dose dependent. So you'd have to be doing it regularly and in high amounts continuously. So I would prefer Dr. Delahaye to give us a little bit more insight on that one.
Yeah, very clear definition. So for you to be impacted, and there are persons who have done this research, you need to be in a sedan-sized car, a 4-door car, with 3 other persons smoking for at least 8 hours. It's unlikely you're going to be in that setting, you know? But the point is, it takes a lot. And so we use that definition to say, if you come into my office and you test positive, it's because you're burning weed. End of story. Because nobody stays in a sedan-sized car for 8 hours with 3 other persons smoking. That's the point. In terms of side stream smoking, we know it for tobacco. Many persons, most persons I know and treat, mix cannabis with tobacco. So we're very clear that side stream smoking impacts individuals who are non-smokers as it relates to cancer of the lung. And so let's bear that in mind. But I'm not aware of any research specifically highlighting side stream smoking as it relates to cannabis having that kind of impact.
Thank you. Not quite sure who mentioned this, but an anonymous attendee wants to know if psilocybin is available locally. Can you remind us what that is?
So we don't want to distract your team. I think let's focus on the topic. And I'm saying that deliberately. We'll go down a channel that.
Oh, yes, we will.
All right. I'll stay in my ignorance and remain innocent. The question also is with regards to vaping. I'm sure I saw a question, but I'm not seeing it here. What's the difference between smoking cannabis and vaping cannabis? So to show how ignorant I am.
I can answer that one. So smoking, for example, is where you get the cannabis buds, grind it up, or as you see people on the street side, crush out in them hand middle, bill a spliff, right? Vaping looks like something like this. This is what you call an electronic cigarette. And what it does is that it vaporizes an oil that contains the compounds, whether it's nicotine, flavoring, CBD, THC. So what happens is that the oil acts as a transport medium. And as you heat the oil, it vaporizes and you can inhale it. But what you're really inhaling is water vapor and that vaporized carrier oil, basically. So it doesn't.
Sorry, pardon my interjection. An important point I just want to make is the elements. So all vapes have an element. They're made from different compounds. And the element being heated leads to evaporation. They've recorded 475 deaths in the US for the year 2019, I think it was, or 2020.
19.
Related specifically to the elements and the products emanating from the heated element. So it's not without its risks,
right?
But much lower than smoking a spliff.
And that is one of the advantages of using vaping, for example, because when they concluded that 2019 study, they specifically identified, I believe it was vitamin E acetate as one of the main constituents. And they had mandated since then that no vaping liquid should have vitamin E acetate, which is why, again, if you're going to use medical cannabis and you're going to have it vaped, you need to have it from a reputable medical source that is being regularly checked and monitored, because it is in fact a medication.
Okay, thanks very much. Just I'm still looking for further questions, so you can put your question in the Q&A, please. Persons who have terminal illnesses and are told that they're recommended this cannabis. Is it available here in terms of alleviating pain for our cancer patients?
Yeah, I'll take that. Absolutely. Have I had to rescue many patients? Absolutely. With psychosis, many. I happily respond to my colleagues when they run into problems, but it is available. You have to know what you're doing, or the patients are going to present, almost all, with psychosis that you're then not able to manage appropriately. Again, I've rescued many. But the point I'm making is, yes, the answer to your question is yes, they're available, yes, they're useful. Again, we're not going there but we have a niche in Jamaica in terms of our legalities of a combination of psilocybin and medicinal cannabis products to provide that cancer care and reduce anxiety and so on and hope.
All right. Are there any other questions, Sam? I don't see any other questions in the
I'm
Q&A.
seeing one in chat from an Amo Rickman.
Okay, go ahead.
Not sure if I heard correctly. Did you say that the vapes available locally contain more than the 10% recommended THC and not enough CBD? Yes. So a lot of the current vapes that you see, whether it is vaping oils or when you go to buy medical cannabis, the actual buds, they actually do have significantly high doses of THC. 20%, 40%, 60%. You can find some that have CBD, but the emphasis, unfortunately, from what I would think is a business perspective, is from high THC containing compounds. So it's a bit...
Yeah, the point must be made. So I personally set up a medicinal cannabis unit in the Ministry of Health. We registered 79 products over that period, just before I left. I'm not aware of any other product being registered. This includes the vape pens, etc., the products for distribution, plus the chemicals. None was registered for those kind of percentages. I think we topped it at 10%, unless you could have presented clinical trials, and there are none. It's why we could have been very clear. Was I liked for that? Absolutely not. Didn't care much about that. We did what was a safe decision. No edibles, nothing above 10%. Is it regulated? A resounding no. That's the unfortunate situation we find ourselves in. And so that's really where a CCFP needs to advocate so that we regulate our medicinal cannabis shops, because they are just doing what they wish. How can you have 60% THC? It's everywhere.
Yes, that is really a shame, untenable, and should not be allowed. And the consequences are clear, they're really dangerous. So we want to thank Dr. Winston Haye and Dr. Jordan Eaton for carrying us on for getting us high in our flight. But we're coming to land now. And so we're going to hand over to the president of the Jamaican chapter of the Caribbean College of Family Physicians, Dr. Seni Onunuju. Just to remind you that when you leave, press leave, you'll be taken to the post test, which you need to do in order to get your CME. That's all you need. Don't need to send us your email. You did that when you registered. Thank you very much to the two gentlemen, and they allowed us to almost finish on time. Thank you so much. Take over from me, Dr. Seni Onunuju.
Okay. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Those of you who are still here, I thank you very much for staying with us. Now, first of all, I would like to thank God for successfully navigating us from the start of this presentation to its conclusion. It has been an awesome, awesome evening with great presentations and wonderful presenters, all very knowledgeable that you don't even know where to ask questions, and experienced in their different fields. Let me thank our presenters, Doctors Joy Callender, Dialo Brown, Alicia Hayman, Jordan Eaton, and Winston Haye, on behalf of the Caribbean College of Family Physicians, for sharing so profoundly of their time, talent, and vast experience with us this evening. I would say for everyone, the job that you did was extremely well done. To Joy Callender, I thank her for expounding so well on nutrition, the benefits of working and maintaining a good, appropriate BMI, among other things, the effect of chromium on maintaining good health. Dialo Brown spoke very well and vibrantly on different types of exercises and enlightened us on exercise prescription and its benefits on health. He also made us aware of the overall beneficial nature of circuit resistance training. To Alicia Hayman, she spoke on climate change, how it impacts on human, animal, and environment. She let us see how even climate change can make some of our vectors, like leptospirosis, more aggressive in dealing with human beings or carrying around their diseases than ordinarily. Dr. Jordan Eaton, amazing in the sense that when I approached him, I said, well, he's a student, but this presentation never looked like a student. It was just as good as if he were an author in the field. And the multiple mechanisms of cannabis in the management of pain. And now, one important point that I thought must be a take-home point for all of us, the fact that if we are not even sure what to prescribe when using cannabis and the patient is under 21 or under 25, we should think clearly or don't recommend anything, and we dissuade them and see if we can steer them until they get to a certain age to attain the maturation of the seat of judgments of the brain. So that, I think, was good. Well, Dr. Winston de la Haye, I expected an excellent presentation, so I really don't have anything to say. I think the presentation was great. He was riding over the presentation. What he gave us in 20 minutes could possibly take an hour, but he got through everything, and we are grateful to all of you. To our sponsors, H2K, Indus Life Science, Abbott, we thank you for sponsoring this webinar and partnering with the Caribbean College of Family Physicians. To both our moderators for today's event, Dr. Anna Brown Morgan and Dr. Pauline William Green, special thanks for so ably guiding us throughout the duration of this webinar. You made it even as lively. I don't know who was more lively, whether you or the presenters, that I really short of words to describe how good I feel about everybody. And to our host, Mr. Heron, and technical support, we are quite grateful, very grateful. And so is to our administrator, Lynn Hyatt Thompson, for the invaluable effort and support that they give us. Then now, last not the least, to the audience. We thank everyone for such a great audience, attentive, interactive. We have certainly been enriched through the acquisition of more knowledge, which we can incorporate into our daily practices. And although not many questions came up, the presentations were so clear, and that's why I think there were not many questions. I hope I didn't forget anybody. If I did, do forgive me. On behalf of the college, I thank you all for participating in this important webinar, and I wish for you a good rest of the Sunday and God's richest blessings. Thank you once again.